There you go.
All right, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the January 23rd Governance and Priorities Committee meeting. I'd like to first recognize that we are on the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw First Nation. My name is Ian Thorpe. I am the acting mayor, I believe, today. Our clerk, a much more important position, is Ms. Sheila Gurry. Today's Governance and Priorities Committee meeting will be held in accordance with the Community Charter and Council Procedure Bylaw 2018, number 7272. Question period sign-up sheet is on the table by the double doors to my left for agenda items only, please. If during the meeting any member of the gallery has a question regarding an agenda item, please write down your name and the agenda item on the sheet. Members have been granted the authority to join our meetings electronically, and I note Councillor Brown is doing so today. Today we have I think only Councillor Brown attending. Councillor Armstrong sends her regrets, as does Councillor Geselbrocht. As far as I know, he will not be joining us. First item on the agenda is the introduction of late items. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. So for late items today, agenda item 5A1, City Plan Nanaimo Reimagined. The overview, we're adding a delegation from Mr. Tim McGrath, so he will have a delegation spot right after the first presentation and report that's on the agenda today.
Thank you very much. Motion for adoption of the agenda as amended. Mayor Krogh and Councillor Perino seconding. All in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Adoption of minutes as circulated. We have minutes of the Governance and Priorities Committee meeting held here in the Shaw Auditorium from Monday, January the 9th of this year. The motion to receive those minutes. Councillor Hemmons, thank you. Councillor Manley is seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. So we move to the first of three reports today, and just before we start, I'm going to comment that I think this is a really important information gathering meeting today, especially for councillors who are new to the table. It relates, of course, to our city plan and the various priorities therein. I don't see us having decision points today. However, this is certainly important information gathering, and I will encourage all councillors, but especially the newer councillors, to ask questions as we go along and increase your familiarity with our city plan. So, Mr. Rudolph, CAO Rudolph, would you like to introduce things?
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Council, and good afternoon, Council. Actually, this is a session I've been looking forward to for some time with the new Council to unpack and then to move forward with the city plan undertaking. So my job here, if we could move to the next slide, is simply to introduce the topic today. And there's going to be a number of speakers, and we've allocated up to 4 hours. I doubt you'll want that much time here today. This is not just about pushing information out to you and the public again. It's about engaging with council and seeking, notwithstanding the comments the chair just made about decisions, council feedback would be helpful on this, and towards the end, in fact, I think it is the last slide in this slide deck, is next steps. So we'll hopefully end up on that. So the city plan, as you know, even if you weren't on council, it was a large undertaking that took a couple of years that culminated in an adoption last July of a previous council of a framework that will guide development in this community for the next, well into the next decade, and when the next review would take place. This is not necessarily about today. This is about the future and building towards that and moving iteratively towards an agreed upon course of action. Since the time that council last saw this document, there have been many staff working hard to think through what implementation of this might look like. And there's many pieces that may not necessarily come at a council level, but there's a lot of detail and action plans that are being thought of, and there will be a time when we have the opportunity to work through each of those. That would depend on your schedule of priorities and how fast you want to do that. So that's coming, and that'll be explained later on today. One of the things I wanted to plant as a seed for you in the back of this is that we are coming forward with a strategic planning workshop with council later in February with a facilitator. And one of the end goals that I think would be helpful is to demonstrate and understand that there's an alignment between what the action plan that's going to be developed by the city plan process and the strategic plan, which is a 4-year plan. And there will be talk today about a 5-year priorities and 10-year priorities for this city plan. So I think there's just this concept of alignment. Ultimately, it will be there in the back of your mind, I hope, when you get to your strategic planning sessions later in February. I'm not going to say anything really further to that other than there's a lot of people that are going to be in front of you today. Keep it fresh, but I would hope that you find this an opportunity to ask questions throughout the day and be engaged. And if you run out of time or gas, we can carry on this conversation at the next GPC, which is scheduled for the 13th of February, I think. So I'm going to turn it over now, I think, to Lisa Bopal-Singh, who's been our project leader and coordinator since day one. But as you will see during the presentation today, this is very much a team effort and very much an integrated exercise, replacing the former OCP, Official Community Plan, the Parks, Rec, and Culture Plan, the Transportation Plan, and those types of plans. So it's a very deliberate, focused undertaking with a lot of content. So we're going to unpack it, but not too much, and then turn it into next steps, action plan conversation, and then monitoring, and then circle back at the end to see where we're at. So thank you very much, and I'm going to sit over to the side and stay out of the way for the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph, and welcome Ms. Bopal-Singh, our Director of Community Development, one of the real leaders in this city plan project. Mr. Harding,
thank you.
Courteously adjusting the height of the lectern.
Thank you. Perfect. Okay, I'm now at the same level as the panel members to my right. So today, Council, as Mr. Rudolph said, you're going to have an interactive presentation. Any one of us could take on any of the components that you're going to hear today. So to my right, we're going to start off with 3 presentations, the first one being the city plan overview. We really encourage Council to chip in, give feedback to the newer council members about highlights that we may not be able to highlight today, ask questions throughout. So we're trying to balance giving you information and giving space for questions. So the first presentation will be an interactive one that shows the true integration across departments. To my right, you'll see the different GMs, Mr. Harding, Mr. Sims, Mr. Corson. You'll also see Lisa Brinkman. And missing, of course, is Dale Lindsay, who's not able to be with us today. So the pressure is on for these guys to be as entertaining and humorous. So I'll pass on that part. So then after that first presentation, we will get into an introduction of the draft integrated action plan. So this is where the rubber hits the road, with council getting to make decisions about your priorities for what actions will implement city plan goals. And then the third presentation is by Ms. Pan, and that will be on the monitoring strategy. So how do we help council and the community understand what progress we're making towards our goals? What are our ongoing actions leading us to? What are our new actions leading us to? And then how does that build into your annual decision-making, your budgets and priorities? So with that, I will start the first presentation. As Mr. Rudolph said, this is more than a standard OCP. We have many municipalities throughout the country and BC asking, how did we do this? So we set out not knowing how this process would go with an integrated engagement process, and managed to combine 6 high-level documents into one. So it serves as our OCP, but it's much more. It provides direction on all the different components that you see in front of you. And I won't get into all of them, but you've seen this repeatedly. One of the other things I'll point out is you have on your report, on your agenda, a report by Kasia Beacon that gives an outline in a bit more detail than we're providing you today. So why did we do city plan? Well, we had an OCP that was coming up for renewal. We had other documents that were outdated. And we also did some background work looking at, instead of being reactive, what do we see coming down the road? So what we saw from the background studies that we had done was projected growth for the city, looking at the next 25 years, adding anywhere from an additional 30 to 40,000. We're currently at 100,000. We're one of the fastest growing metropolitan areas in Canada since COVID. And one of the benefits of council giving us direction to do this planning during COVID means that we are well prepared as we come out of the pandemic to have a game plan for how we move forward. So essentially, you have all these details, and I would also encourage you, if you want them, they're all on our website. We can give you links to them if you need to find them. And what this does is it tells you the story of how we can accommodate the projected population, the projected employment, and the different demands for land. And the land use plan that Mr. Corson will speak to later on will show you how we anticipate accommodating this future growth over the next 25 plus years. So I'm not going to go into all the details, you've got the slides there. Now, of course, during the Reimagine process, Council gave us direction to use the vision or the framework of the donut economics model. Again, it's essentially about us having thriving people in a thriving place and ensuring that our social needs of all community members are met within the capacity of our environment. This framework then influenced how we structured our 5 city goals. And what I will emphasize to Council is every time you do a planning process, since the 80s and sustainability, you use different models. You're familiar with the pillars. You have the pillars in your strategic plan, for example. And in our case, through council direction, we've used this framework. So what you're going to hear today is an outline of each of the goals by the different GMs to my right. And you see our framework here is the structure and organization of our document. And under each goal, so Green Nanaimo, connected, healthy, empowered, and prosperous, are then different topics. And you'll see there's priority areas that are focused under each of these broad goals. And one of the things I might mention here is that there was a deliberate recognition of the high-level guidance or roadmap that the city plan provides. And hence, you get the actions as a separate document that can be updated annually. Typically, an OCP review on a major scale happens every 10 plus years, with a moderate review every 5. But by having the actions more integrated and in a working document that you can look at and review every year, we allow council to make more flexible decisions. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over to Mr. Sims to run through Goal 1, a Green Nanaimo.
Thank you. Welcome, Mr. Sims, our General Manager of Engineering and Public Works.
Thank you, Chair. Much appreciated. Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. So just briefly, and the documentation is all there, but the Green Nanaimo section really looks at a number of questions. How can we as a community live in harmony with our natural area, our natural world? How can we support environmental regeneration or rejuvenation, as well as resilience for not only our community, but for the environment around us? So Nanaimo's set in a beautiful natural setting, and of course, we don't want to create, we don't want to take away from that. We want to preserve that. And so it's also about restoration and enhancing that reputation. So this particular section incorporates Council's greenhouse gas reduction goals, which came up in 2019. It incorporates the city's climate action strategy and plan. It also addresses the traditional infrastructure like water and sewer, and natural infrastructure like streams and wetlands. And really this section sets the goals for the city to move the dial on a number of topics: sustainable development, its urban forest. An absorbent city is a term that's starting to come up. How can we absorb more of the intense rainfall? Also it incorporates the energy transition to more and more renewables. Transportation mode shift, which I'll talk a little bit about later on. And then there's a strong linkage, for the first time in our OCP, a strong linkage between growth and the capacity to withstand that growth in service capacity. And of course, lastly, just to touch on the zero waste approach that in support of the regional district. The Connected Nanaimo section is really around access to mobility for everyone. And this is really a strong indication of how the entire plan is integrated. The transportation network, the Parks and Rec network, parks and trails, as well as land use is all really connected. You really can't plan for and do one without the other. The long, narrow nature of our city creates some challenges, and so we've attempted to address that. The focus again is improving the connectivity between our urban centers, are often called growth nodes, some of the more compact communities, and along those corridors. We're looking for, there's a good section about community hubs and trying to be compact, walkable communities, and trying to shrink the amount of reliance on automobile. Of course, the connected section and the supporting schedules still need to provide for the safe, effective, efficient movement of goods and services throughout the community. We still rely on motor vehicles to move products and goods everywhere.
Chair, just a question back to you, as we're going through all this, if we're going to go fast, if we wanted to stop at any of these sections, either the new councillors or if councillors want to mention anything on these other sections, because we'll be moving pretty quickly through all this at this pace.
Thanks, Mr. Harding. And again, I don't see any questions on my screen at this point, but I encourage council to feel free to indicate if you do have comment or question as we go through. And Mr. Harding, are you up next?
I am.
So I just need to introduce you as the General Manager of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you again, Council, for this and for us to be able to share all this together. Again, as you'll see with this section, as in the other sections, is that there's a lot of crossover. This section addresses community well-being for all our residents and livability of our city. So there's a number of sections in here we may want to just highlight and talk about. The first particular one that starts out this whole area of community wellness is the security section, safety and security, and that's on pages 72, 73. And there's a reason why it's kind of pause for this one is that since this was adopted, Council, I think with some programs that have come out of this already is the community safety officers that Council appointed, as well as park attendants that have happened this summer, which was a real key part, and some of the information we gathered came from there. And I'm just going to put it back to Ms. Bhopal Singh of another grant that Council just received under called Youth Resiliency. They have other name called Gun and Gang Violence, but we're using Youth Resiliency. And it's a great example, I think, of working with all the community on this one, and this is a good example, I think, to talk about.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Harding. So one of the examples I'm going to speak to today is what you've got here, for example, in this section or any other policy sections. It sets the stage for us to take consistent actions. So you are likely already aware that the City of Nanaimo is one of the recipients of a $1.8 million grant to address youth, what I'll call it youth resilience. It's through the Building Safer Communities Fund. It's actually called Gun and Gang Violence Prevention. Youth resilience is just our internal way of calling it something more positive. And over the next 4 years, we'll be working with the federal government and various partners from the school districts, Nanaimo, and other interest groups to address upstream. And this is an example of our role as a city, what we can do with our partners, what we're able to do individually in terms of our mandate. There's mention of the direction you've given on things like community safety officers, and how we can work upstream, midstream, and then also downstream to respond to many challenges that our city faces. And this document outlays many policies that support upstream, downstream, midstream actions. So just an example of how these policies are then supporting either ongoing actions to keep our city and our community safe and our work with partnerships. So, and back over to you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you. The other ones on there is affordable housing, and Council just went through a GPC on affordable housing. I think, as you'll see with the recommendations and goals within that are very consistent with what you just were receiving in the direction of that. Intergenerational living, another great example where you'll see examples throughout the whole document of how this links together and how, for example, land use relates to where we put our recreational facilities, where we put our daycare, where we put other things to allow people from all ages to be able to live, play, work where they are. Food security, another example, you'll see it, food security here on its own, which has some very clear and broad objectives of how to strengthen regional food systems. But you'll see crossover with that again in land use. You'll see it in parkland management. You'll see it in culture. You'll see it in a number of areas. Recreation, culture, and wellness. You'll see again. We're very excited. I'm particularly excited because Parks, Recreation, Culture Master Plan, rather than sitting off on its own somewhere, is integrated throughout this document. And so it's an amazing way to do it. We haven't seen it in my career. I haven't seen it integrated this way. So very excited to see it throughout the document, and being able to also show how recreation and culture links with wellness, and how we're focusing more and more with our recreation and culture programs where health and wellness and recreation and culture are connected. You'll see that with council's motion even to put primary health care in some of our recreation facilities. We've been able to do that at NAC, and we do more. But that recreation and culture can be actually not just a benefit to health, but actually a solution to health. And as Ms. Bhopal Singh said, maybe that resiliency that we need to have with our youth. So when they do get older, they're able to, sustain other life things that come at them. So that is wellness, if there's any questions from council on the wellness section.
Okay. Excuse me, Mr. Harding, I'm having a few problems
miss?
advancing the slides.
Oh,
Maybe I could get it.
Sorry to interrupt. I do see a question from Councillor Eastmere. Should be on.
Yeah, okay, now it is, yeah, thank you. Through you, Chair, my question is around the C 3.2 affordable housing. At the bottom of the page, it says policies and then gives some tools. The first one being consider use of residential rental tenure zoning to secure a portion or 100% of new residential development on selected sites for rental housing. And then I just wondered, are these tools that we are using, or are there suggestions of things that we could do? So that one I'm specifically wondering about, as well as the next one down, which is providing additional incentives to new residential development projects to secure more units that are below market rent levels.
Okay. Through the chair to Councillor Eastmere, the first question you asked about residential rental zoning is part of a project that we're looking into through the implementation of the affordable housing strategy and this policy. So it's not something that we're currently doing, but it's something that we have direction to do through our work with you in looking at the options for that in our corridors and our town centers. So what you'll see here is a mixture of policies that support new actions, that's an example of one, and others that support ongoing and enhanced action. And then your second question, Councillor Eastmere, was related to incentives. And we already do provide certain incentives that support 50% DCC reductions, for example, for affordable housing developments. And it's looking at what more could we explore and do. So that's yes, we're doing things, and what else could we do?
Okay, and how do we have, is that a conversation that we're going to have as part of strategic planning?
These can be in terms of the priorities that council may wish to focus on. So council may see some of these policies and some of the actions that we recommend, and you may say, okay, staff, you've recommended the following. However, what I'd really like to see in the next 4 years or 5 years is this one prioritized. So you do have the opportunity to do that through that process. And then in addition to that, on an annual basis, we give updates through the affordable housing strategy where we will let you know about progress being made on some of the items that are already in play. And you can choose through that to also look at it annually with your budgets and prioritize that way.
Sorry, and one more question just about the updates on the affordable housing strategy. Is that what we had at our last meeting? That was the update?
Yes.
For the year? Okay.
Through the chair on January 9th, GPC,
Yeah.
you had an update from Ms. Brinkman and Christy Wood, and I think Mr. Lindsay, giving you a fairly extensive update. Now, if you need interim updates on some of the different elements, and there are, I think Ms. Brinkman let you know that we would have certain reports that weren't finished yet that we'd be coming back to you on the outcomes of, and those will continue to flow in between.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Eastmere. And again, I think this is a really good opportunity today for, first of all, for all council to have a refresher on what has been identified in past terms as priorities for council, what we are already doing to some extent, and to indicate personal comment on where councillors may feel are priorities they would like to see more attention given to and further direction applied to those areas. So by all means, those comments are welcome. And having said that, I don't see any other questions at this point.
Thank you, Chair. We'll move on then to Empowered Nanaimo, which addresses reconciliation, representation, and inclusion. And we'll go through these topics real quickly. But I believe Ms. Balpal Singh wanted to mention something on the first one, which is the Truth and Reconciliation, just on how that was developed and included in this plan.
Sure. Through the chair to council, or thank you, Mr. Harding. So as council knows, we worked quite closely with Nanaimo First Nation, and we had direction through the terms of reference for doing this process through Reimagine Nanaimo to include things like addressing climate change and things that had changed and evolved since the 2008 OCP. And truth and reconciliation was one of those topics. So what you'll see is like, I think Mr. Harding and Mr. Sims will say, throughout every section of the document, we deal with things like social issues and environmental issues. We have the separate sections, and it's the same with truth and reconciliation. You'll see elements of truth and reconciliation, supportive policies and directions throughout the document, and we have the standalone section here. And linking back to Councillor Eastmer's comment about are there things we're already doing, as you're aware, we have supported various staff training related to truth and reconciliation, helping us meet TRC 57, and then we have ongoing actions and also some direction for some new actions. And again, one thing I should point out, an official community plan document does not commit council to do any of the actual directions. So it is up to you to prioritize, because you only have a finite budget, a finite time, to figure out which are the areas you wish to focus on. We do, of course, have very rich data from the community during our engagement process during phase 1, 2, and 3, and new council members might like to look at the results of that and consider that, and know that all of these different elements are based on feedback we receive from the community about their interests and their priorities. And with that, I'll hand back to Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. And so we'll go quickly through these ones that are in here. So equity and inclusivity and access for all, both those are two separate sections. And one of the highlight there was that council had a very successful introducing an Accessibility and Inclusiveness Committee this last term, which helped, again, drive a lot of the input into this plan. But that was a very successful committee, which also addressed a lot of the goals, or worked towards some of the goals. And now that it's actually legislated now provincially that every city has one. Council is ahead of the game. We've got one, but the committee would focus on those. And again, a lot of those objectives and goals you see in there are talked about in accessibility for transportation, land use, recreation, health, all the different ones. Political voice and engagement. Again, it outlines ways that residents can participate in plans like this. Reimagine process itself was a good example of how public can participate, but also other objectives of how they can get messages to yourselves and be part of the process. Culture is recognized as a significant contributor to the city's quality of life and goals, and that section again highlights how we can prioritize some cultural amenities or programs to make it continue to enhance it. Archaeology and heritage outlines how do we protect those things that make us unique in the city particularly. Community, public art, also as you'll see it throughout the document, different ways that we can have public art in public realms, both inside and outside. Community events and festivals. From coming out of the pandemic, there's just a real thirst for more and more activities outside. One great example, I think we could see that some of the goals come to life was working with Snable First Nations and school district and other partners to make September 30th happen. We had over 5,000 people there within the day, and actually more as they participated in some other recreational activities. So this section shows where the community wants to go or would like to go in having more festivals and events throughout the community. Parks, I can go on all afternoon. Chair, if you like me on just this section, parks, the importance of parks. It wasn't a surprise to me that, again, through our statistical surveys, the residents want more parks, they want more trails, they want more open space. That came out again here. And we also saw the value of the mall through the pandemic, where really that's only the places people could go to keep mentally and physically healthy. So again, you'll see a lot of what the public wants there. And one of the things we found in this one particular, we've learned more and more. Now the public are saying, okay, some of our parks are starting to look a little tired because of some extra use. So now how do we refresh them and make them a little more current and up to date? And then waterfront development, again, being a waterfront city, some specific goals that look at access to the waterfront as well as how you protect the waterfront. And that's all I have on Empowered Nanaimo.
Okay.
Thanks, Mr. Harding. Mr. Rudolph, did I miss you wishing to speak? I'm sorry if I did.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is, I guess, just a broad comment. It was stimulated, I guess, by the questions around housing. So in my way of thinking, there's going to be a couple ways to approach topics coming out of this. Number one is for each of these major categories in the plan, each of the 5 columns or each of the, and we're explaining these, there's going to be proposed later on today a schedule for you to have a day on each of those where you could dive deeper into it. So there will be a chance to get into some of this in that way. The second opportunity is through the strategic planning workshop or shops that we're coming forward with you. If on the housing, let's use housing as an example. If housing is a priority topic that there's a general consensus on that really begs the comment that this needs to come back to council with the suite of things that are on the plate and what other options are there. So it'd be the task for staff to give you some of those options in terms of, well, this is what we're doing, this is what's there, but do you want to see more here or less there or something like that? So there's a second opportunity. This is in addition to the recurring yearly, quarterly updates for the housing strategy. It's something in place. So I do think just by the end of the day, hopefully we can get some clarity around that thinking process. We're just putting it on the table today, but this is all coming back, and it can come back fairly quickly, but there's going to be a couple of ways to approach it. So that comment applies to all of these topics. So I think that will help you, because if you just spend a day on this thing, and you can see that there's 10 topics in this list here, each of those is going to have action statements presented to you, or at least a summary of the first 5 years for your consideration, and some of those will be maybe more important to you at this time than others. So I think there's going to be opportunity to do that. So I hope you'll come out of today with some clarity on next steps.
Thanks, Mr. Rudolph, and I think your point is well taken, that we're starting this afternoon with a high-level overview, and we're gradually going to start narrowing our focus at the level of the 5, I'll call them pillars, probably each of which would warrant at least one governance and priority committee meeting, possibly more. Later this afternoon, we're going to narrow down a little bit more to potential action plan suggestions and look at that, and then also talk in the longer term about monitoring of our success in these areas. So I think we're bringing things down to ground level as we approach this, but we're starting from a fairly high level, as you indicate. And Mr. Harding, is that it for you? And does that mean that Mr. Corson is up next?
Yes, that's me, Chair.
So I will introduce officially Mr. Corson, Director of Corporate and Business Development. Always a pleasure.
Great. Thank you, Council. Sorry.
Didn't mean to choke you up.
I know, I'm so... This topic just means so much to me. Thank you. Appreciate that. Yes, so as we mentioned, with the city plan, we've taken lots of various documents which used to sit alone, and they've been brought into here. And the Prosperous Nanaimo section is a accumulation of the city's economic development strategy embedded into this document. And the economic development strategy, we started working on it during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. We had an economic development task force that was established, and we worked with the business community to kind of get a sense of how they wanted us to take a different approach towards economic development. And they provided some really good feedback on their areas of focus. And we were really benefited by the work that's getting done with Reimagine Phase 1, because the public were asked what their priorities were for the community, and we were able to incorporate that into the economic development strategy. So we actually finished the economic development strategy a bit before the city plan, which was fine. And then what we've done is we've taken the key elements from the economic development strategy and created that as the Prosperous Nanaimo section. So there's complete alignment between the two. The economic development strategy is a bit thicker. It's got a little more meat in it. The Prosperous Nanaimo section is kind of a boiled down version of it. It's much easier to read. And Prosperous Nanaimo section reflected council's thought at the time around donut economics and the need to make sure that we're not just focusing on growth for the sake of growth, that growth is being done so that it benefits the entire community. So everyone is all tides are rising with these actions. So we do have these 6 goal areas that the plan's centered around. The economic capital is focused on that we actually need to have the proper infrastructure in place to grow existing businesses and to attract new businesses. An example of that was in the past, we were trying to grow the tech sector, but we didn't have fiber optics in Nanaimo. So we kind of had the cart before the horse, and now we've got fiber optics here with TELUS, and we also have a strategy that looks at potentially using a city a broadband network with our other public sector partners, which we could leverage. So economic capital is about making sure we have the right infrastructure in place. The human, social, and environmental capital is not something you probably normally see in an economic development strategy, but very much goes back to council's concern to making sure that we have equity in our community and we address issues like the social disorder, and that we're actually making sure the environment is not being left behind at the sake of growth. Business development is very much a traditional area in economic development. Here we're focusing on retaining local businesses and growing local businesses. So making sure that the businesses that are already in town are being assisted and being assisted in their growth. Innovation technology is about the tech sector, but also very much about turning Nanaimo into a recognized smart city or intelligent city. And we have a number of initiatives we've been working on behind the scenes, and we'll bring those forward to council in the near future. Placemaking and investment attraction is probably the more traditional form of economic development, where you're out trying to find a big company to come to town, and that's really a lower priority in the plan. But this is the focus for the investment attraction is about reputation building and celebrating Nanaimo's unique features. And working with our partners, we're just starting a new branding exercise with tourism on Nanaimo and how we're going to actually brand Nanaimo going forward, and that's being integrated with the city as well as the Prosperity Corporation. So it's kind of a nice start to this term. And then in terms of tourism, is kind of separate from economic development, but it's an area that council puts a lot of resources towards, and we work closely with the conference center, with the Nanaimo Hospitality Association, with the various hotels and tourism operators in town to help grow the tourism sector in Nanaimo. So that's the Prosperous Nanaimo section in a summary, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Corson. Councillor Perino, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and through you to Mr. Corson. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I was very pleased to see, actually, on page 126, on 127, you talk about the hospital campus and as an employment magnet. And, sometimes I want to scream saying, healthcare is the #1 employer in town. And it's the area that's going to grow substantially, hopefully in the next few years. I just wondered if you wanted to just add any comments to that. Just wondered what your thinking was on that.
Yeah, thank you. Through the chair to Councillor Perino. Yes, that was very much a focal point of our discussions through our conversations, recognizing just like you've said, how important the hospital is to the economy in terms of job creation, but also in order to have a healthy community, we need to have, if people want to move to Nanaimo, they need to know they have doctors that they can go to and that they can be looked after. We did, prior to this plan, we finished an area plan for the hospital area,
Yes.
which was all about how the hospital area could grow, and that area plan's been incorporated into this document as well. And based on the work we had at the Mayor's Leaders Table, we know
Yes.
how important the campus is overall, and how we want to work with Vancouver Island University, potentially to establish a medical school, making sure we're identifying talent in Nanaimo that could stay in Nanaimo and help benefit. So yeah, it's very much a priority.
You've been reading my mind. That's very good. Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. I would echo Councillor Perino's comments as well. I've noted that arts and culture fall under recreation in a previous set of priorities, but have they been thought of as well as an economic generator and contributor? And do we have figures about how much they contribute to our local economy, the arts and culture sector?
Thank you, Chair. So it's mentioned, Council Manley, or mentioned to Council Manley. Yeah, culture is integrated throughout the document. Again, you'll see it in many aspects, and it's in prosperous, it's in tourism, it's in some of those other areas. We had some older numbers on the impact when we did the culture master plan a number of years ago. We could look at that and update it. I don't have updated numbers now, but I know there were some methods then that we used that we could emulate again and try and do an 2023 update on what those impacts could be.
Okay, thank you. I know it's also like a destination generator in terms of bringing people here, arts, culture, sports, and we are sort of centered to the island, so we get people coming here to the Port Theatre and things like that. So just wanted to reference that. Thank you.
Yeah, through the chair, the work we're doing with the Tourism Society, very much a strong partnership with the city in terms of event planning, creating events to bring people to Nanaimo, and for Nanaimo people to take advantage of those events. And certainly, like you mentioned, the Port Theatre, major investment that draws a lot of people into the community for those. Yeah.
Thanks, and I think Councillor Manley's comment or question goes to the integrated nature of this plan, and certainly things like destination tourism, sports tourism, cultural opportunities that we can offer bring financial and social benefits to our city. So they all fit together. As Mr. Harding correctly mentioned earlier, one of my interests on council has always been the Parks, Recreation and Culture area, because I think it is very important. But I learned early on in my days on council that equally, or perhaps more important, is the area of having a prosperous city, financially viable and a strong economy. Because if you don't have that, then you don't have the resources and the wherewithal to support the other areas that we also feel are important, such as environmental initiatives, cultural opportunities, and so on. So I think, as somebody once said to me, if you want to be carbon neutral, first of all, you have to be cash positive, because it takes money to fund these initiatives. So I think it's something worth keeping in mind, and I'm really pleased that we are moving ahead with the Prosperity Corporation as well as the Tourism Board, and looking for leadership in both of those areas to guide us further. Councillor Manley, something else, or is that a holdover? Thank you. Anybody else? Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair. With the conversation, I wanted to do an example, because I love doing these examples, but one that bridges sports tourism, prosperous Nanaimo, culture, and another, probably a variety of others, is council last year supported Chief Wise in going for this year's provincial junior basketball tournament. and it's growing into a major event. Ms. Bhopal Singh can talk about the numbers, I believe, what we're looking at right now.
Yeah, through the chair, currently they have 98 teams, and in the last event that was held in Kelowna last year, they had around 60. So a significant increase and draw in the teams coming across BC to Nanaimo for this event, and it will take place March 19th is the kickoff, and then the actual games run from March 20th to the 24th. So, but as Mr. Harding said, that this hits all the buttons of tourism, reconciliation, youth resilience, featuring our different facilities, both at the city, the school district, and others. So, thank you. And through the chair, I think it's over to me now. And I just wanted to do a check-in with council. We have maybe another 10 minutes on this presentation with the way we've been going with discussion. Just want to see if this is working for you, and we'll just get a bit of feedback. That's okay.
Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. Given that we're 10 minutes out, I do have two pieces that I'd like to bring up. One is reviewing today's presentation, I was reminded of how much information there is in this document, and I wonder if we have any plans to make a 3-pager or a 1-pager or something that really kind of high level with not a lot of diagrams, but just this is basically the intent of what we're trying to do. And the second piece that I hope you can cover before we go over to the next presentation is I'd really like to know the interface between neighborhood plans and city plan.
Through the chair, Councillor Hemmons, we actually do have an executive summary. We were remiss probably not attaching this to you, but it is online. So after this meeting, we will provide all the different links I've mentioned. So the community have that online already, but that you can see the Coles Notes high level of the city plan. And then with regard to your second point, which has just slipped my mind.
The interface between neighborhood plans and city plan.
Perfect. With that one, that is actually coming up in our next section after I quickly cover this one. So if you're okay with holding tight, we can explain the links between that and council's commitments through the neighborhood association policy and where we're at with that. And Ms. Brinkman and I will support that discussion with council. So very briefly, not going to speak too much about it, and we'll see the different GMs are going to run through quickly each of these pieces, or we could potentially skip it. But what I want to highlight here is an important part of this document is it serves as our official community plan. Now, because of the integrated nature of this document acting as our active transportation mobility plan, also green and blue Nanaimo in terms of our assets in our environment, what you see in this section of City Plan, D, is a visual representation and guidance of how all the different elements of our growth and our environmental objectives, our transportation objectives, all fit together. And by having it, this section really shows the integrated nature. So instead of having a standalone transportation plan sitting in another document, we have now one seamless document where all these different elements fit together. So I'm going to see if the panel to my right can do a whistle-stop tour. One of the key parts is making sure that you're aware of the official community plan land use designations that Mr. Corson's going to set out. So with that, I'm going to turn over to the panel and ask Mr. Sims to give an overview of the blue and green network, which is the first of our structure layers.
Thanks, Ms. Bhopal Singh and Council. I'm just mindful of the several hints that Ms. Bhopal Singh dropped to be quick, so I'll endeavor to be so. So the blue and green network really seeks to protect and enhance the city's system of natural areas. It's really about creating livability, mitigating the effects of climate change, and then enhancing preserving and enhancing and restoring our natural assets. So this is a really great visual. I like this. Quite honestly, it wasn't until I saw this visual that I realized how many of the city's water courses are actually above ground, like in the form of streams. It may not show so well on the slide, but if you look mostly around the seafront, downtown, Departure Bay, Solaire, and the North Slope, those represent piped systems, but the entirety of the rest of the city is actually in open surface streams, which is actually, I find, quite encouraging. The Blue and Green Network is intended to deal with the changes that we're seeing in climate, wild swings in temperature, more heat and more rain, and so that's really why we need our natural assets to help absorb that. I'll leave it at that. Pass it to Mr. Corson.
I won't get as choked up about this one, but it's still very important. So obviously, from a council perspective, quite often you have development applications in front of you, and one of the things that staff reviews is compliance with the OCP designation. So this is the map that represents the official community plan designations for lands. So I imagine you'll get quite familiar with this over your term. This and the zoning bylaw, of course. So this plan is based on when Ms. Bhopal Singh showed us the growth that we're anticipating in Nanaimo. The question we had to answer was, well, where do these extra 40,000 people go? And through this this exercise, we have these growth centers. Downtown is the primary focus point for development, and then the red on the map there, which is Woodgrove and North Nanaimo Town Center, Country Club, Hospital area, VIU, and Chase River. Those are the other we call them secondary urban centers. And then each of these areas is connected by corridors, so mixed-use corridors or residential corridors. And those examples of that are like Bowen Road or the new Metro Drive. So those are connecting it. And then around each of the growth areas, we have neighborhoods, which are a little bit more, there's opportunity for more change in those neighborhoods. And then we have more suburban neighborhoods, which are farther away from services, and that will see less growth. Then, of course, we have the industrial lands, which is really important. We have the heavy industrial lands out at Duke Point, which supports the prosperous Nanaimo section with the idea of establishing a logistics hub for Vancouver Island and working with the circular economy and working with all the folks out there. And then we have our existing light industrial areas that are already in the city. There's not really any growth anticipated, but around Bowbin and Green Rock, Northfield, and Old Victoria Road. We have a waterfront designation which spans the entire waterfront from the border with Lanceville all the way down to Joan Point. And that's really just recognizing the interface between the foreshore and the marine environment. And then we have the green space network. So if it's a dark green, it's basically a city-owned park, with the exception of probably Saskatchewan on there. And then we have resource development? Resource management, which are lands which kind of act as parkland, but are not owned by the city. So those are the designations. Happy to answer any questions you might have.
And I do have a couple. Councillor Perino first.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and to Mr. Corson. The area that you've got in the solid white, which is this Nanaimo First Nations land, are we working with them? That's the port, right? That's the port, the one port, what is it, one port drive, one port road? Can't remember if it's drive or road, but, and I just wondered, are we working with the Nanaimo First Nations on that, or are we discussing? I just didn't find anything in here relating to that particular area.
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Perino, the white area on there is actually the defined reserve, the Sunamuk Reserve.
Yes.
Both reserves, so the Cedar Reserve and the Downtown Reserve.
Okay.
And then the Port Drive lands, we actually have a master plan already in place. So there's a specific document that details development for Port Drive.
Okay.
And that's included in this document.
It is, okay.
It is, yeah.
Okay.
So we already have policies in place.
You can tell I'm still learning. Thank you.
Well, there's lots to learn, yeah.
I know. Thank you so much. That's great. No, I look forward to hearing more about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Manley.
Thank you, Chair, through you. So a lot of this that we're looking at is also corresponds with, I guess, zoning, density zoning as well. Is it Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so through the chair to Councillor Manley, the idea, this is the future growth of Nanaimo. So you have your OCP level here, and then if your zoning is inconsistent with this, then you need to go through a rezoning application. So if you're, let's just say you're next to an industrial area, or was it in here, it was industrial, but it was actually a single family lot. While the OCP supports an industrial use, your zoning probably wouldn't. So then you'd have to rezone to an industrial zone in that case. So this is kind of the future. In many cases, the zoning does align. I'd say probably 80% of the time, and that's why you don't see as many OCP amendment applications in front of council. You tend to just see rezonings. But sometimes you actually have to amend the OCP map as well, because the developers coming forward actually isn't consistent with this map either. So there's a kind of bit of a iterative dance there as the city grows, because this is us taking a stab at it in 2022, what we thought the city would be like in the future, and someone might come up with a better idea, and then that comes forward to you for your endorsement.
So in the area like the Green Thumb lands, that's already been pre-zoned as primary or secondary urban center. And
So yeah, so that's a great point. So it's been as an OCP designation, but the zoning's not in place yet.
Okay.
So what will happen is, over time, zoning applications will come forward for specific, they'll probably do it in a phased approach. So specific phases of that development will come to you for a rezoning. The OCP designation is now in place, but not the zoning.
One of the things I'm curious about, Patrick Condon, who's a university professor, an expert in urban development and affordable housing, has recommended upzoning for affordable housing to eliminate land speculation. So, you know, if there was a series of lots that are currently single-family zoned, if they were upzoned to multifamily, they would be zoned strictly as affordable housing, and that way you remove the speculation, which is what drives up the cost for nonprofit organizations who are in fact looking for land to do projects. Is that something that the city has considered at all?
Through the
Go ahead. No.
through the chair, if we could take a stab at that between myself and Lisa Brinkman. I believe on January 9th, this was mentioned by Ms. Brinkman, so this is something that we have had direction from council to do. So Ms. Brinkman, if you'd like to give the timeline on that.
Thank you, through the chair. Yeah, one of the priorities that was mentioned by council in 2022 was to look at zoning in the urban center and corridor land use designations on this map, and to identify properties or an approach for changing zoning to be consistent with the city plan. So, and we anticipate bringing that forward to you in the fall of 2023, but that is on our work plan that we're working towards right now. It's one of the top two priorities actually from council.
And in particular, have you looked at like zoning that it would just strictly be for affordable housing so that it couldn't be used for speculation for market housing, and then, you know, the land value goes up and somebody wanting to put affordable housing there would end up paying the speculation on the land? Has that been considered?
Through to the chair, yes, that is our understanding of the project, and how to achieve that though is what we need to put our minds to and bring some options forward to council to consider.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me. I don't see any further questions at this point, Ms. Bhopal Singh. So thank you to the panel and yourself.
Thank you. We have a couple more on structure, but one thing I did want to build on, Mr. Corson, is I'd mentioned that the Local Government Act doesn't obligate a municipality to undertake the actions or policies identified in their plan. There's one caveat. Any land use changes must be consistent with the official community plan. So that land use that Mr. Corson went through and his explanation of making sure that any changes in zoning are consistent with that is one thing that is embedded in the Local Government Act. So through the chair to Councillor Perino, and I apologize if I'm not coming over clearly. What I was saying is that in the Local Government Act, there is direction or requirements that any changes in land use are consistent with the direction a council has endorsed by bylaw in its official community plan. And so that map that shows the future direction, so if somebody wanted to take a property, for example, that's residential and turn it into commercial, but the future plan says it's industrial, they would have to either not do that or apply to council to have the official community plan changed to align with the direction. Thank you. And with that, through the chair, if I could turn over to Mr. Sims on the mobility network.
Yes, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you short.
Thanks. Thanks, Chair. So really, there's two maps involved with the mobility network, and it ties again with this integration between land use, Parks and Rec, and culture, and the concept of urban nodes and corridors. So it really, or we call them mobility hubs now as opposed to urban nodes, and it supports affordable and accessible mobility between all of these sections, again shrinking the commute distance as much as possible, and shifting the mode more to active forms. And so really the first map that we have here shows a number of things. It shows our primary networks for active mobility, that's sort of in the red, thin red lines, and then the secondary networks. So these would be on street or through parks or trailways for active mobility. It has the context of schools on this particular map, may be difficult to see in this particular incidence. The regional district transit supporting the transit redevelopment strategy is also represented on this map. So that consists of essentially the bus rapid transit, so using the corridor of the Old Island Highway between Woodgrove and Chase River via a number of transit exchanges, and then the bus frequent transit system, which kind of piggybacks on that. So that's map one, and then map two, so this is really about the active mobility and accessible mobility. And map two is essentially just the road network. And this is generally required as part of the official community plan. It sort of sets the standards for roads. And there's two major types of roads. There's mobility streets, and those are for the denser areas, the more intensive uses, the more complete streets. And then there's the urban streets, and those are really about moving goods and services sort of away from and apart from the urban centers. And that's it really on the mobility. A real quick highlight. I did want to touch base on one thing that's certainly on staff and the community's mind. It was triggered by Councillor Perino's comment about the hospital and the campus, but really there's, from an economic development point of view, community livability, there's a triangular network between the hospital campus, VIU, and downtown. And so mobility, communications, as in Mr. Corson referenced a black fiber, all of those sorts of things are very much on the economic development and community livability front as well.
Thank you, Chair. So D6, I'm just going to comment a little bit on what it actually represents. Because with D6, it's kind of a snapshot initiative of where we are right now throughout the community, parks, recreation, culture, services, including our trails and our natural areas. But then also shows where we've come. Particularly, we've used 2005, which was the master plan, our last parks, recreation, culture master plan. So it kind of shows what progress have we made through some of those goals, and it's quite interesting to see the increase that council has done in parkland and trailways and other facilities. Then with this map, particularly here, it then shows where are we going with some of our key services. Where's our next cultural, recreational amenities going? Where do we see still some we're lacking in parkland, where we're lacking in access for people to go out and enjoy either an outdoor activity or an indoor activity. And one of the examples I was going to say with another benefit of us integrating in here is typically when we do a Parks, Recreation, Culture Master Plan by itself, we're looking at, okay, where do we own land to put our facilities, or where, you know, because usually we've owned something, it's a little bit easier for us to build. Whereas now with this, we've integrated, you know, we should be putting our recreation facilities where these urban nodes are, versus where we just own land. Let's put it where we know people want to be, and where we can combine a bunch more services together. And the example using like now is proposed South End Community Center, where we will want it, we're proposing it in the South End, hopefully within that urban area. That will include a number of cultural services, recreational services, hopefully daycare services, other things that could possibly library, health, other things that are coordinated together and consistent with the plan. So again, all these plans should be linking, as Ms. Bopal-Singh showed her in her first slide, how they all link together, and this is for this area.
Okay, and through the chair, unless there's any questions around Part D, if we could proceed.
Mr. Chair, if I could just comment, I'm a recovering planner, so I can't help myself coming into the conversation. I think a couple of takeaways on that last slide about the land use, the land use slide in particular, and the mobility one. There's a couple for me. One is, if a land use application comes forward and it's inconsistent with the new OCP, that's a fairly significant decision that council is going to make. If it's, you know, shopping center in the wrong location, or it's you know, these types of things, somebody wants to put housing in a designated industrial area, that type of thing, I would suggest that hopefully we'll see few applications for OCP amendments unless it's obvious for some technical reason. So that's a pretty important concept to remember. I think the second is that what this land use and these mobility routes are telling us is that it should inform decision-making about where we're putting our investments as a city. If we're going to upgrade certain streets or turn them into complete streets or invest in community centers or those types of things, they should be directed to where you want the growth to go and facilitate that type of thing. So these aren't just static maps. These are visions of where we should be placing our investments and our emphasis for certain things. So, you know, you'll see that, I think, come through in various in the capital budgeting process. Hopefully, I would like to suggest that you will see, well, how's that lined up with this community node that was supposed to be here, or the hospital, or something like that. Demonstrate that we're actually meaningfully trying to implement this plan over the course of time. So I just thought, again, the concept of a fresh new OCP should not trigger a lot of amendments to the OCP land use map. This is the direction you want to go. The zoning map may not. That's kind of a reflection of a tool to manage growth, and there's lots of discussion around that as well currently with the current government about maybe and the mention of maybe upzoning or getting rid of the zoning tool, you know, in an effort to fast track and enable housing to take place, as an example, faster. But there's trade-offs in that argument. So just a couple of comments from my perspective on the side.
No, I appreciate that very much, Mr. Rudolph, and you're quite right. The importance of the official community plan needs to be recognized. It's the framework which guides the future of the city, and where we put things and where we concentrate certain services and where we give focus. So I appreciate that reminder. Ms. Bopal-Singh.
Okay, thank you. Through the chair, I'd like to introduce Lisa Brinkman, who's the manager of community planning, and this is the section where we'll be discussing the linkages with area planning and neighborhood planning.
So before we move into that section, Ms. Bopal-Singh, I think Ms. Gurry is going to remind me.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure if this is working, but the delegation is now time, I think, for Mr. McGrath could come and have his 5 minutes, and then we'd move on.
Thank you.
To the next one.
Thanks for that, and that's just what I was going to suggest. Ms. Bopal-Singh, again, thank you, and don't go too far away. But before we move into an introduction of the draft integrated action plan, we do have a delegation. And Mr. McGrath, if you would like to come forward, introduce yourself, please, and then you'll have 5 minutes.
Good evening, Council. My name is Tim McGrath. We're now 50, 60, 70 minutes into the meeting, and I'm going to be the first one to mention it. Citizen safety and security. We've gone quite a bit of time. Nobody's even mentioned it. We've seen 5 goals, 35 bullet points. 1 bullet point relates to safety and security. Now, I would have liked to have had an opportunity to make a formal presentation. Unfortunately, I was at Port Place Mall last night. There was a stabbing death. We're all sitting here. This is not the first death in the last year as a result of violence. We've had elderly citizens thrown to the ground and robbed right on Commercial Street. We had a pregnant lady bricked middle of the afternoon on Commercial Street. We've had, unfortunately, a challenged person murdered at Maffeo Sutton Park. The list goes on. We've had homeless people or challenged people killed on Athletic when the house was burned. They found his body inside. But we have 1 bullet point when it comes to, I think they call it community safety. Now, community safety could be everything from traffic flow to bicycle lanes to what about citizens' safety? We talked about the numbers and feedback from the community that this whole city plan is supposedly built on. I don't think if you look at your 35 bullet points, I don't think you get 69% of the people saying, except in safety and security, that they support that bullet point. 69% of the people say they're scared. We've had 8 community security audits. They all come up with even a higher percentage. 73 to 86% of the people say they're scared in their neighborhoods. Now, we have an issue. There's 5 goals, and we're talking about upstreaming and downstreaming and all of that, but we have 5 goals, and in those 5 goals, you then draw your priorities. And then from your priorities, you start an action plan, which we're going to hear about, which, by the way, safety and security for the citizens isn't in. But we'll hear about that. From the action plan, you then get your implementation plan, then you get your policies, then you get your procedures, then you get, well, the problem is with 35 bullet points, safety and security is so far down, when you start going into this implementation stuff, people are going to look around and say, well, yeah, but that's not one of our priorities. Regardless as to what this council says, we're looking at the next 10, well, actually, I think Ms. Bhopal Singh said 5 years. What's in your first 5 years? What's in your
1 minute,
5 years?
Mr. McGrath.
Right now, safety and security is paramount. We can talk about carbon, and we can talk about homelessness, and we can talk about bicycle lanes. But if people aren't safe, you're not going to get any doctors coming to work at our hospitals. Sorry. No matter what happens, if it's, you can talk about the economic viability. Sorry, without citizen safety and security, that don't mean squat. We talked for 70 minutes, not even mentioned. It's time that this council pull back the plan and say citizens' safety and security has to be a goal for our city. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McGrath, and your timing was perfect. Appreciate that. Are there any questions of the delegation? Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and if you'll indulge me, if I could ask a question. On page 72 of the plan, C3-1, community safety and security, and it says exactly what you said, 69% of the population mentioned that this is a major issue. Tell me, particularly because this is such a land use and an economic growth use, tell me what you would add in on the information about community safety and security. Tell me what you would add into this document. Sorry, and I don't mean to put you on the spot,
If this city plan is supposed to be a land use document, then why are we talking truth and reconciliation? Why is it mentioned? It's not a land use program. The city staff has already said it's not just land use, it's the plan for the next 20 years.
It's definitely the whole community initiative. So tell me what's missing.
Safety and security is missing as a goal, plain and simple. It has to be a goal. If it's not a goal, it gets ignored as it drifts downstream, upstream,
Yes.
whichever.
Yes.
Okay. The problem is quite simple. If safety and security is not in there, we've gone through 70 minutes and nobody even thinks about it.
Well, it is here. It's
a bullet point, along with 34 other bullet points.
Excuse me,
It's 3
Councillor
pages.
Perino, just a reminder, we're not here to debate.
Sorry,
the delegation.
you're absolutely right. I apologize, Mr. Chair. It was just, I was anxious to hear what you thought it should add. And that was my main question, so that's fine.
If you were to put it in as a goal, then it would be considered when arranging priorities. If it's not a goal, it doesn't hit the priority list. If it doesn't hit the priority list, going downstream, it doesn't hit the action plan, it doesn't hit implementation, it just gets pushed aside. Yeah. We all know that there's limited resources, limited time, and it's just not going to get it if it's not a goal.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And thank you, Mr. McGrath. I appreciate your comments. I see no further questions.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Council.
So, Ms. Bhopal Singh, we're ready to have you introduce our next section now, I believe, which is related to our integrated action plan.
My apologies, Chair. I had jumped the gun just a little bit, and there's a couple more slides in the first session to go through first.
Good afternoon again.
Yeah.
We are going to pick up where we left off and cover part E of the city plan, which is taking action, and you've got the subheadings there. I'm going to turn over to Ms. Brinkman, and in response to Councillor Hemmons, the questions around how neighborhoods and also our area plans are going to be addressed through this plan and other processes that come out of it will be touched on there. So without further ado, if I could turn over to Ms. Brinkman. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brinkman.
Thank you, through the chair to council. So the next section of city plan we're going to talk about is part E, which is taking action. And so the first part is area and neighborhood planning. So area plans provide more detailed policy direction for specific areas in the city. And currently there are 5 area plans that form part of the city plan bylaw. So it's the downtown plan, the Port Drive plan, the Port Drive Waterfront Master Plan, pardon me, that's the second one. No, yes. The Hospital Area Plan, the Bowers District Master Plan, and the Sandstone Master Plan. So those are the 5 area plans that form part of City Plan. And there are also neighborhood plans, and they are used as guiding documents for city. In addition, the city will engage with neighborhoods on a periodic basis to identify priority actions. So using the Neighborhood Association Supports Policy as our guide. And one thing we've been talking about is an engagement opportunity with the neighborhoods in April of 2023. And so this may align well because, as you'll see later in the presentation where we talk about breaking out the integrated action plan and looking at different sections of city plan and talking about the actions, then you'll have that neighborhood context, that neighborhood information for when we do those, looking at actions related to the similar areas. So I'll get more into that. Okay, and so City Plan also provides policy guidance for temporary use permits and development approval information and development permits and heritage conservation areas. City Plan also has guidance related to some financial mechanisms that the city uses, such as development cost charges and community amenity contributions. And then lastly, this taking action section talks about relationships, and this section reminds us that growing a sustainable city is a team effort requiring many partners, such as our First Nation partners, community organizations, and the business community. So now we'll start talking a little bit about implementation of City Plan, and that's the Integrated Action Plan and the monitoring strategy. So, reminder, City Plan contains the goals and policies. The Integrated Action Plan will contain the actions to achieve the City Plan goals, and then the monitoring strategy will track the progress towards City Plan goals. So by monitoring specific indicators, we can learn if the actions and investments are chosen are effective and then adjust actions accordingly. The Integrated Action Plan is a living document that can be adjusted and refined annually, and the monitoring strategy is a tool to guide those improvements. So this diagram shows how the City Plan contains the overarching goals and is the policy document, and the Integrated Action Plan will help, and monitoring strategy help to implement City Plan. So the actions chosen by Council will guide department work plans and ultimately the work plans of each city employee. So just setting the stage for you for your upcoming sessions related to strategic planning and capital expenditures, just how that filters down into department work plans and individual work plans. So City Plan was adopted in July 2022, and in the spring of this year, we're proposing as a timeline is to sort of dig into the Integrated Action Plan. We intend to have a full draft ready for you by March of this year, and then also following that, get into the monitoring strategy, and we'll get more into the timeline too in the next presentation. So that concludes the City Plan overview portion. So I don't know if there's any questions. We'll get the GMs back.
Yes, thank you. I see Councillor Hemmons with a question.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me, could I ask you to go back to the plan integration slide? And I would like to clarify my understanding. So City Plan has a lot of policy statements within it, and it's kind of like motherhood and apple pie. It's everything we want to do. The council strategic plan happens every 4 years, and that allows each council group to choose which out of those policy statements they're going to prioritize an action through staff work plans. Is that accurate? So by, say, this council just goes 100% into affordable housing, I know we're not going to do that, but those other policy statements don't go away. They continue to exist in City Plan, and they may actually be realized in the next council's strategic plan. Is this accurate?
Through the chair, it is a good reminder that City Plan, it's 25 years to implement. So, and we have limited resources and limited staff, and so thinking about what are the priorities, and each, for you as council, what are the priorities for your session and for utilizing resources?
That strategic plan is really this group's decision on which of those City Plan policy statements we are going to drive forward and when.
Through the chair to Councillor Hemmons, yes, and. So when you see this here, the strategic plan where it's coming in is showing that it has an influence on the Integrated Action Plan, but really your strategic plan kind of sits as an overall umbrella. So there's two parts where we'll be bringing forward a range of recommended or proposed actions for you to consider. You then will say, yep, this meets our priority. Now, some of them you may make your strategic priorities for the next 5 years. Others, you may say, you know what, this is something for city plan to achieve in the next beyond 5 years and beyond for somebody else's term. And then with your strategic plan, there are going to be elements that aren't part of city plan, that may be, for example, more governance related. And so you may have some additional actions that don't particularly relate to this, but relate to what you want to achieve. Perhaps the one I am speaking to most might be your internal governance that isn't specifically here. And so there, I think as Mr. Rudolph said, there's a nice, what we're trying to do is frame up this conversation so that you're well positioned to have a suite of different actions with some recommended timelines on our part, and then we get your direction around that. And it's two-part. It informs your strategic plan, and then it also helps us with the integrated action plan. So we're trying to make sure we're nicely aligned, and the stars have aligned with your election and adoption of city plan that we're able to do this.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Hemmons. And I was, in my mind, having a picture of us all sitting around this table 25 years from now, congratulating ourselves on having completed everything in the city plan. So we'll see how that plays out. Thanks. Ms. Bhopal Singh.
So through the chair, we're wrapping up this part of our presentation on the city plan overview. We know we've moved fairly rapidly, but just wondering if there's any questions or if the councillors who were here as part of its adoption have anything to share with our newer council members, anything that we can respond to. We're here.
I'm not seeing any speakers on my list. I think it's been a really informative and useful session to this point, Ms. Bhopal Singh, and certainly a reminder of how big the document is, how much there is in it, and I think as we gradually narrow our focus and decide on our priorities, it guides us and keeps us, as Mr. Rudolph said earlier, aligned with what council priorities are and where our pillars of interest lie. So unless there are questions at this point, I believe we're ready to move on.
Okay, perfect. So through the chair, I'd like to introduce, you've met Ms. Brinkman, of course, many times. She's our manager of community planning. And also on our team is Kasia Began, who is one of our planners, who has really been instrumental in working cross-departmentally to pull together a draft set of proposed actions. And so today, what our staff are going to do is basically give you a quick update on where we're at and next steps where you'll be involved. So with that, I'll turn over to Ms. Brinkman.
Thank you, through to the chair. So a lot of what I'm about to talk about, myself, I'm going to introduce the integrated action plan, and then Kasia will get into an example. We've touched on some of this in our previous presentation, so I'll move along. But just to emphasize that today we're setting the stage for the integrated action plan and monitoring strategy, and then of course dig deeper into, in the next few GPC meetings, into the integrated action plan, if you agree with that approach. So, of course, the city plan contains the goals and policies. Integrated action plan will contain the actions to implement the goals, and the monitoring strategy will track progress towards the city goals. The integrated action plan will contain the full range of actions from all the city departments. So, and these actions will be ongoing actions, so ones that kind of are repeated annually, actions that are, specific for the next 5 years, and then actions potentially after 5 years as well. Also, projects will be talked about. So there's sort of actions that impact the city as a whole, and then there's specific projects that are site specific. The integrated action plan can be reviewed and updated annually and will be aligned with the capital budgets and city budgets. The integrated action plan is not a bylaw, so it's more of a working document that is endorsed by council. Actions are intended to be taken with an integrated approach with interdepartmental communication and collaboration between the city departments. The The action plan will contain a welcome section and introduction to explain how it links to the city plan and monitoring strategy. And Part B will emphasize the integrated action plan's relationship to the 5 city goals. And then Part C will contain the actions organized by the 5 goal areas. So you've seen this slide today. So you'll see actions under each of the 5 areas and then actions under each of the specific sections as well in each of the 5 areas. So now Kasia is going to show an example section of the Integrated Action Plan from the Economic Capital section of City Plan, and this falls under the Prosperous Nanaimo goal.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, I've been working on this for a long time, so if you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, because I have my mind pretty well wrapped around this. So we're going to try to provide you an example of what the action sections will look like. And it's not just the 35 topic areas, we also have policy under city structure, so around growth management, around land use, and we also have policies around area plans, neighborhood plans, development permit areas, and other financial mechanisms that we use. So it's going to go beyond the 35 main topic areas, just to be clear on that part. So overall, we want to start the action sections with an overview of what this action area is going to cover. So each section is going to have how it links to the city plan. It's then going to have what supporting documents have helped inform the actions that are in the specific section. So this one is C5.1, Economic Capital. So that could be a list of different documents. In this case, it's the Economic Development Strategy, but it could be council motions, it could be other supporting plans, it could be a whole host of other documents that have helped support adding actions to the section. Then we have an overall area that says roles. What is the role of the city versus what is the role that others do? So this will give the general public a sense of jurisdiction and how we plan to achieve these actions. Next, we go on to what we call at a glance. So these are areas of focus. We've generally landed on 3 general areas of focus that we've included in these actions. And so if I look as an example here, one is we go overall, continue to invest and revitalize the downtown. And then we say, why? Well, we identify the downtown as one of our city's primary urban centers, and that's what we heard from the community. And then how do we plan to do this? Well, one example is that we intend to achieve this through a broad range of public and private sector investments. So it just overall provides a sense of how we're going to achieve these actions. We then move on to the actual action section. And so for this one, first way to think about it is we have programs and we have projects. So programs are something that would apply to the entirety of the city. They could be a strategy, they could be a plan, they could be an initiative. One example I'd like to use is Go by Bike. That is a strategy that applies to the entire city. Versus a project would have a specific geographic location. So we could map it on a geographic map of Nanaimo. And another example of that is the new playground that we've built in Maffeo Sutton Park. So that's the 2 overarching starts. Is it a project or is it a program? And then we get into the time frame. So is it an ongoing action, something that we regularly do as staff? And these aren't operational, these are more higher level actions. And then we go on to the immediate. So we intend to maybe do these in the next 0 to 5 years. So that's where it may align with the strategic plan. And then we go on to future. So these are actions that we would like to do, but we're not sure if we're going to do them in the next 5 years, but we'll put them into beyond 5 years because we don't want to forget about them. And the other thing I wanted to mention, so there's the project component. So there's a program and a project, and they're very similarly laid out. We then have a column that says, how is it connected to the city plan policies? Because we want to make sure that the actions that are proposed are rooted in city plan so that it shows that we're moving towards achieving the goals of the city plan. And then lastly, we have a section at the very bottom, which you can see is called Integrated Action Areas. So we recognize that most actions will support progress in multiple topic areas, rather than including an action in multiple sections because there are actions that could be included in multiple sections because of the integration of it. The actions will be included where city plan policy best supports it. The integrated action area provides a cross-reference to connecting sections in the IAP, so the integrated action plan, through the use of these icons. So each action only appears once, because otherwise the document would be very long. So just like we did in city plan, we have these icons that show how the actions are interrelated with one another. And that concludes a general sample of how that section will look, if anybody has any questions.
Councillor Hammonds.
Thank you, Chair. One question, did you consider shortening the timeline at all between we're doing it now, we're going to do it within 5 years, and after 5 years? It seems like that's a broad time in which to implement some of these things.
Okay. Through the chair to Councillor Hammonds, this is actually the type of feedback and discussion that we hope to have. So what you've got here and what we're bringing to you, do remember it's staff's suggestions, and for you to then refine and say, you know what, we want to look at moving what you've proposed into beyond 5 years. In terms of the 0 to 5 year time frame, you have a couple opportunities, and I think Mr. Rudolph can help with this as well, where we could shorten the time frame, or you can, on an annual basis, through your capital planning, the budget approvals, put definition into, okay, in 0 to 5 years, we want to have, let's say, a trail in this specific area. And through your designation of the resources, you can actually put more definition the time within those annual departmental business plans. Or potentially we could put more definition in this. I think we are looking for your direction, and there's many ways of doing it. We were just trying and capture. Without getting your feedback, we have no idea what your focus is. We have some general, and if you choose to focus on certain priorities, that has impact on finance, budget, existing capital expenditures, changes to that. I don't know if Mr. Rudolph has anything else to add along those lines.
Yeah, through the chair, I think this can be overwhelming pretty quickly. There's so much in this. And so at the council level, I think I want to go back to the strategic plan exercise. You're not going to be able to have 400 initiatives underway and be focused on all of them as a council. So what are the critical few that you really feel strongly about, the topics, and then we drill into those, and there's a large number of those. You can let staff worry about a lot of the other things. There's a lot of things in the queue. We're updating our IT systems and stuff just to keep up, and there's a lot of things that are going on in this list, but you're going to have the opportunity to go through each of these topics in detail and spend as much time as you want. So at the end of the day, though, what are the critical few ones that are at the top of your mind? Let's just use housing as an example. I think it's a top of mind topic, affordability. It's broader than supportive housing and social housing. It's housing because there's so many people that are impacted. But what's our goal here? That could be one of your major things. And then there's so many categories of actions and so forth that are in there. The one was suggested earlier about pre-zoning, or that's one of probably a number of things that you could do. So all we're doing is putting it on the table today and giving you a teaser on this action plan list. But this is a small piece of, I don't know if these people would be prepared to share with you how many actions they've come up with, but I think it would be interesting to hear a number that they've been working on. They've been working really hard behind the scenes, and some of this will be more important to council than others. But we need to steer the resources of the city in the directions that you want the staff to work on. And it's not just the planning department, it's other departments as well. So I think we'll try to find a way to make this simpler for you to me, it does align, the alignment of all this stuff with your strategic plan, if it's a 4-year horizon, that may be making more sense than a 5-year from a council perspective. Use that as the template. What do you want to get accomplished in 4 years on that subject? This is our priority. That makes total sense to me. 5 years is, that's a close, but 4 years is easy to make that change. So I'd like to throw it back to staff and say, well, how many of these initiatives do you think you might have? And then we'll try to simplify that down to maybe 20 for your strategic plan.
Through the chair, I'll let Ms. Began talk about the numbers, but one of the things I think Mr. Rudolph alluded to this. When we were doing this action plan, we were mining over 40 different documents council endorsed over the years of actions and desires that either hadn't been achieved in the last 40 or so years, reviewing them, saying, okay, gosh, that park's been built, okay, that's done. Wow, this is still like outstanding. Does that make sense? Does that fit? And so I think, Cash, what was the original number we had? It was it was a really big list.
Like it's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. Like we have 40 plus documents, each with, 20 plus actions minimum, right? So when you pull those all together, they're pages and pages and pages of actions that were just sitting in documents, right? Many of them were never implemented.
So, for example, they could be council-endorsed documents going back 20, 30 years. And one of the interesting exercises about, city plan, there was criticism that it was a hefty document. Really, compared to the stack that we had refined down, and it being a very graphic document, it was an assimilation and a refresh of the community's priorities, council's direction. And so now we have the opportunity to say to council, previous councils, including yourselves, have endorsed these different actions. Here are the ones we suggest are going, potentially, you may want to prioritize aligned with this plan, and you may give us more, you may agree, but our challenge has been drilling it down to a manageable number, and as Mr. Rudolph said, a practical number given your term, and also the ability for you to identify things that are important, but you acknowledge due to resourcing and other opportunities may be beyond 4 years, right? Knowing the length of time for the plan. So I think we hope that the refined list, do you have an estimate of the number that we think we might put before council? We're still getting that together, but we're drilling it down. I think initially at one point we had over 800, and it was like, that is not manageable. So we're coming to you, and you may say to us, gosh, where's this action? We would say, okay, actually it was over here, and it's sitting out here in a future, but if it's something important to you, we raise it back up. Like, this is your process, and this is your process on behalf of the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Eastmuir.
Thank you, through you, Chair. I really appreciate Councillor Hammond's bringing up that point about the timeframes, and I'm just throwing this out there that I think like potentially like a 2-year timeframe for some of these things that were really identified as a strategic priority, because that gives us a year sort of too short sometimes because things take time and a recognition of that, but then at least after 2 years, have we actually made any like tangible progress on this, or is it just sitting there? Because I think the danger of giving ourselves 4 years to do something is you get to the end of that 4 years and go, oh yeah, we didn't really make it on here, but the next council, and I just don't want to be there 4 years from now.
Through the chair to Councillor Eastmuir, what we're attempting to do is give you at least a smorgasbord of choice. Then you have the opportunity to say, okay, in 2024, we want to initiate this, and we direct staff to the following. In 2025, 2026, and similar. And with that comes the alignment with budgets, the annual budgeting. And so we absolutely have the ability to do that. But I think in the first instance, we just need to get your response to this cut, and then understand your discussions around, okay, Councillor Perino or one of you making motions around, this is the top. I'd like to see this started next year. I'd like to see this started this year. And I think, as Mr. Rudolph said, maybe the affordable housing strategy is a good example of a mini version where we've come to council, we've gotten some clear priorities, we've given you timelines, and annually we give you updates related to that. So there's absolutely the ability for us to listen and take your direction. And that in turn directs everything from the departmental work plans down to staff's alignment year to year.
I would say smorgasbord achieved, so thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Eastmuir. Yes, and I appreciate the comment about timelines. I think that's worth looking at, recognizing, of course, that we can't do everything all at once, but we're not going to lose sight of things that have been identified. And to me, this conversation was also a reminder that our action plans eventually The ones that we choose to focus on relate to city work plans, and those in turn, as you just acknowledged, Ms. Bhopal Singh, relate directly to budget and budget decisions. And that's a whole other component of our decision-making that we have to keep in mind. And we're very mindful of that this time of year when our tax notices go out and we get feedback on that. So it's something else that definitely impacts council decisions, and rightly so. Any other councillors with questions or comments at this point? I'm not seeing anybody. Thank you very much.
We'll pass back to Ms. Brinkman to bring us in for the close on next steps.
Thank you, through to the chair. So just as a last slide, we're proposing a timeline you see in the table in front of you. So to try and keep this manageable, as Mr. Rudolph said, to focus on starting with the Green Nanaimo, Connect Nanaimo, start with March 13th GPC, look at that. So you'll have a full draft of the integrated action plan by that date. And then you can see too how actions are actually kind of interrelated between sections. So sometimes when you're focusing on a Green Nanaimo or Connect Nanaimo, you may, as we have done, be feeling like, oh, this action could actually be in a prosperous Nanaimo. So you have to, so because city plan is so integrated, there will be a bit of that. But having said that, we'll start focusing, what we suggest is, starting at the beginning of city plan and moving to the end, basically is how this table is laid out, starting Green Nanaimo, Connect Nanaimo, and then hope, if we need an extra session, you can choose to do that, and then moving on to Healthy Nanaimo and Empowered Nanaimo and so forth, and then concluding with the monitoring strategy. So this is an approach we're proposing and looking for your feedback on.
Councillor Perino, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, so the strategic meeting that we're going to be having, talking about what we want to see coming to the table, how would that necessarily fit into the March 13th, April 24th? Why would we go this direction versus what we may come out of through our strategic planning day?
If I may answer that or try to respond to that. So currently we're looking at a facilitated council workshop towards the end of February.
Yes.
That's going to be an informal, room kind of conversation. And there will be a second follow-up to that. We're proposing to try to have, the facilitator, I've asked that we have that wrapped up by the end of March, that exercise. So probably a couple of meetings. So that's one angle. She's also an experienced planner and an experienced mayor politician. So she sees this. So we're bringing her in actually this week to go through this entire thing on the planning side. My vision on this was she's the type of person that can help us knit these things together. And so that we do see the alignment. But at the end of the day, we're still unpacking topics for you and all these action plans. And this could go on for months, and we're suggesting that we start, and that I think things will align by the time you get to the end of your strategic planning process. So each of these topics need to have details discussed, and I think they will go in tandem with each other, but they should not be at cross purposes. And one of the things that was on my mind is this list in the correct order? And I'm not sure if the team is ready to modify this, but do you want to move one of those topics ahead of the other? That's what we need some feedback on today. I think there's an opportunity to do that. I'm not sure. Yeah, that's one of the ideas that I would suggest, that you look at this and say, okay, March 13th. Well, actually, we'd rather deal with one of the other topics for that day, and we can do that. The other thing is that we still have a bunch of GPC topics that probably need to be talked about at the council level anyway. For example, I'll throw it out there. I've asked for an update on the Downtown Safety Action Plan for March, with the implementation of the clean teams, the graffiti initiative, the CSOs, all of that. Check back in. We've been in place almost fully for 6 months. How's it going? that's aligned with this as well. So there'll be other topics that you're dealing with. And I think part of this is council owning those agendas for GPC and directing us as to the topics you would like to see there and how you'd like to see them dealt with. So I think back to this, there's one of the things that when I hear the delegation today, I was thinking, this is such a multifaceted organization. We are really busy. 48,000 police files, 9,000 incidences in fire department, so on and so on. And $424 million in building permits last year. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of record level of people attending recreation programs. There's a lot of moving parts here. So we have to spend attention to everything, but we can really focus on certain things that need more attention at this time. And that's a fair comment. But even on that topic, we have over 80 positions going into public safety over the current 5-year time frame, which is a huge investment. So it's not that maybe we're not telling our story very well, and that's part of this, is getting that message out there and being very precise on how we're describing things. And so I do think you'll have a whiteboard, blue sky session with the facilitator, and then we will align that back to this exercise. So I think at the end they will dovetail together.
Okay, so thank you, Mr. Chair. So that was what threw me, was the strategic plan the strategic meeting that we're going to have and what we want to see, and that this looks prescripted. So I like the idea that you're asking us today, what do we think comes first? And as much as I'd like to see some things moved around too. Thank you.
Thank you. I have several speakers. Councillor Hemmons, you're next.
Thank you, Chair. So in terms of feedback, this lineup looks fine to me. I also want to offer that I really like the framework in terms of how the integrated action plan is laid out. So all of that is good. A question I have regarding input. So Green Nanaimo and Empowered Nanaimo, we had a lot of committee input on those two pieces particularly. So will committee members be invited back to those GPCs to help us prioritize, or has that been given any consideration?
Through the chair, I'll let Mr. Rudolph take a crack.
Well, good. Thank you. Again, one of the things that council is going to be doing on February 13th, I'm sorry, is a session on committees and mayor's leaders table and all those types of things. So again, there's another alignment piece. So how does that fit into anything? So right now, the only select committee that we have, or standing committee for some of us, is the advisory committee on accessibility and inclusiveness. That's an ongoing committee. The other ones are, apart from some of the specialty ones like design advisory panel, those type of things, but as far as the environment committee and any other new committees you may want to start, those are not active, and in fact they don't exist at this time. You're going to have to re-advertise for those types of things. So there's bringing people back in. Yeah, that's a question around all of these. If you have a GPC on the strategic plan or on this, do you want to have an engagement component to that or bring that in? Which I think is a conversation you need to have. I mean, the last council chose, even on the strategic planning, to make it their plan, and riding on the coattails of the input they received during this the election of that year. So you could bring in committee members. There's nothing wrong with that. We could be asked to invite them, or certainly Environment Committee was only one. Do you bring in the Prosperity Corporation people for the economic development one? Do you bring in the SPO board for the social, some of the social? So there's a lot of questions around that. I just thought, as long as it's council's direction, we'll do whatever you ask.
Thanks, Councillor Hemmons. Good question. Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, I don't have my buttons working, so I'm waving over here. To what Mr. Rudolph said, on February the 13th, we will be coming back with committees, but some questions around engagement is really going to be involved with that too. So I'm having a session with some staff tomorrow just to see if I'm on the right track with staff, bringing this forward to you on the 13th, but engagement, the GPC committees, it's all going to be part of your conversation on the 13th. And then just to Mr. Rudolph's previous point too about the strategic plan session that he's been working on and that you're going to have sessions on, to Councillor Perino's point, I don't think one's exclusive of the other. I think you can have your strategic priorities for your 4-year term, which get reviewed and looked at every year to see if you're still where you want to be and get updates on that. But I don't think that it needs to be exclusive of the city plan and these action plans, and or there just needs to be an alignment. So you're going to have a lot of action plans in your city plan that might necessarily be your priorities for your 4-year term, but they can align and go at the same time with one another. So
Thank you. And I guess my thought on committee involvement or committee member involvement is that it needs to be a level playing field, given that we have had active committees focused on certain elements of our city plan, and not active committees on other areas. And I could just as an example say that we have an accessibility committee which has been very successful, and their voice I'm sure would like to be heard. We have not had a cultural committee, and I'm sure there's voices there that would like to be heard, but they haven't had a venue. And so I think we have to make sure that we level the playing field and hear from everybody. Now I have Councillor Manley and then Councillor Eastmuir.
Thank you, Chair. So my question is related to the neighborhood plans. This came up earlier on, and I imagine that was part of the process in developing this plan, looking at some of the plans that had previously been developed. And I'm bringing this up because I got an email from somebody who was concerned about the approval for the development on 5th last week, and the upzoning for 2 houses into a multifamily unit. And just they were concerned about whether we're going to continue on with looking at the existing neighborhood plan as we move forward with the city plan, or is there going to be a process where we we're always inviting the neighborhood to make comment on zoning changes and changes to the existing neighborhoods, but I'm just wondering about the integration of these types of plans, neighborhood versus overall city plan.
Through the chair, so the second part of your question, so all rezoning applications are referred to neighborhood associations for comment. So, so there is that opportunity for feedback from the neighborhoods through that process. But the neighborhood plans themselves are key guiding documents. So you'll see in city plan, they are key guiding documents. And so when staff are reviewing a rezoning application, we do refer to city plan and also the neighborhood plan to see, if it's consistent. And that can be brought forward to council in the staff report, a reference to the neighborhood plan and if this proposed development is in alignment or not. So they are guiding documents. They don't form part of the bylaw, so you won't see a need to amend a neighborhood plan formally like you may with the zoning bylaw or city plan. So I hope that answers your question.
Yep. I do have just a follow-up, because I have had feedback from people that the neighborhood associations, some of them are very closed. They're not very welcoming to other people, and so I'm wondering what is the process for broadening the scope for involvement for people in the neighborhood associations?
Through the chair, I'll start, and Ms. Brinkman may jump in. The current council may recall that the prior council had adopted a neighborhood associations policy, and so in response to concerns about how representative neighborhood associations are, there is a set of criteria laid out for neighborhood associations who want to be recognized, who want to receive referrals and a certain level of support from the city, what the expectations of council would be. And Ms. Brinkman can talk to the number that have met that criteria. There are other associations that are perhaps less formal who are not able to meet that, and they get a more moderate support, like we'd support any citizen with questions. However, they do not get the same level of referrals. And in part, that was council's response to neighborhood concerns about how representative an association is. So, Ms. Brinkman, I don't know if you've got anything else to add. Oh, no, we were good? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I know we had a discussion about supporting neighborhood associations and providing grants and sort of spreading that money out. And I think it's, you know, they're a positive contribution to the community, and, you know, what support we can give to building their capacity and their ability to reach their neighborhoods would, I think, something I would support. So thank you.
Through the chair, if I might make another point, and that is, we did really extensive citizen engagement that meant that people who weren't attached to neighborhood associations could give input through Reimagine. And some of the information in there carries forward and will stand the test of time for a couple of years, particularly the statistically valid surveys. And the way it was done was that you could break it down. We broke down feedback by neighborhood. And so in phase 1, 2, and 3, and we'll send you a link to the online reports for those of you who may not have read it, it's some really rich feedback that really shows the community's desires that were fed into this plan, and also may guide council as you consider other decisions. Thank you.
Thank you. And just to follow up on Councillor Manley's comments, I think the past council was very clear in showing support in the value of community associations and indicating that we wish to assist them in forming or in their year-to-year operations, and providing assistance where possible, provided that they met certain basic criteria. The challenge, I think it's safe to say, for council is when we have delegations come to us and are speaking on behalf of the neighborhood association, it's very difficult for us to know exactly how many people they are actually speaking for. And that's always very difficult and perhaps impossible to resolve. But certainly the value of community associations is something that we recognize. Now, I don't have other speakers at the moment, except Ms. Gurry, perhaps.
Just to check with Ms. Bhopal Singh first to make sure that this presentation is complete. Chair, I'm not sure if you want to take the scheduled coffee break now at 3 o'clock as scheduled, and then before proceeding to the next one.
Well, I hesitate to interrupt Ms. Bhopal Singh and hurry her along, because I've done that a couple of times. But is there anything else, Ms. Bhopal Singh, before we wrap up this portion of the afternoon?
No, we are all good, and we really appreciate your time and feedback and look forward to seeing you after the break.
And we will deal after the break with monitoring strategy, and we'll look forward to continue our conversation then. All right, we'll thank Ms. Bhopal Singh and others and take a break. Council, should I suggest 3:15? Is that reasonable? 3:15? Thank you. We are recessed.
This is the 2018 redux of the lighting at Nanaimo's historic bastion. I've had the pleasure of being part of the relighting project on this amazing building in downtown Nanaimo. So what we did is we've replaced the original high-pressure sodium lights, which basically did an okay job of lighting up the bottom 10 feet of the building, and replaced them with modern LED lighting that has the capacity to change color. We can run through a number of different colors that we have pre-programmed here in a pink, a purple, a green. Probably my favorite on here is Rainbow Chase for Pride Week. It'll actually run all the way around the building all the time.
With this new technology, organizations can now request that the bastion be lit to promote their cause by going to the City Nanaimo website and following the instructions. Go to Your Government, Bastion Lighting Requests, Complete the lighting request form and submit. You will hear from us within a couple days if your request has been approved, and the bastion will be lit in the colors that you have requested. If you have any questions, please contact the Mayor's office at 250-755-4400.
So the next time you're in downtown Nanaimo at night, come on and check out the new dynamic lighting at the Bastion.
This is Nanaimo, and it's a city that's growing. With over 100,000 people now calling Nanaimo home, the demands on our infrastructure have never been greater. From the streets that interweave and connect us all together, to the facilities that we recreate in, to the parks that offer us an escape to nature, there's one significant guiding force that makes it all possible: the city budget.
So the city collects money from a variety of different sources, including user fees, government grants, casino revenues, investment income, etc. However, property taxes are the main source of income for the city and account for about 60% of the total revenues collected.
Regardless of which neighborhood you live in, property taxes have helped shape nearly every aspect of the city.
The budget continues to focus on public safety and provides support to our most vulnerable populations. However, property taxes also fund everything from the police and fire services that show up when you call 911 to the streets being plowed when it snows, as well as sports fields being mowed and all the cultural and recreational amenities that the city has to offer.
As well as property taxes, rates based on actual usage, or user rate fees, fund the services and infrastructure that keep Nanaimo flowing. Imagine even a day without clean, healthy drinking water, curbside recycling waste and organics pickup, and sewers for wastewater. These all protect public health and the environment.
Utility user rate bills are sent out 3 times per year and pay for water, sanitary, sewer, and waste collection services. So these fees contribute to the budget and pay for operating expenditures, investment in new and renewed infrastructure, as well as any debt repayment for these utilities.
Like a bicycle, a car, or even a home, all of the city's infrastructure degrades over time. Maintenance planning, lifespan, and replacement has to be scheduled and accounted for.
The city has stewardship over $3 billion in assets and has 3 asset management reserves to help fund the replacement of these. Since 2013, property taxes have increased by 1% per year to fund asset management.
The city's infrastructure also allows for a great variety of recreational opportunities, like all of the great programming found in the quarterly Parks, Recreation, and Culture activity guides.
Registration and drop-in fees help reduce the amount of taxation needed to fund these recreational services. So these services are not fully funded through user fees, but they do help keep recreation alive in Nanaimo.
And of course, Nanaimo's infrastructure, city services, and recreation programming are all managed by People Power. Rounding out the benefits of the budget, the city also plans for arts, culture, and reconciliation opportunities that really give Nanaimo vibrancy and renewed appeal.
It takes a lot to keep our growing city running and provide the infrastructure and services that people not only want, but need. The annual budgeting process ensures that we can make that happen.
For an in-depth look at our budget, visit the city's website at www.nanaimo.ca. And while you're out there, enjoy the city that your tax dollars continue to build.
Our emergency routes, they are priority routes. They consist of roads that go to and from the hospitals, from the fire department stations, and from the BC ambulance stations. They're also their main commerce routes through the city of Nanaimo. So this allows commerce to happen during a snow event. So we hit those roads first. Once those are clear and open, then we move into the secondary roads, and then we move into the residential areas, which are dead-end roads and cul-de-sacs. And it can take up to 96 hours before we get into the residential areas. One of the side effects of plowing snow is it does end up on the sidewalk, and this can be very frustrating for homeowners and business owners that have just cleaned the sidewalk. It also pulls into their driveways. The crews try to keep it as close to the curb as they can, but we need to open the road right up to the curb to allow the drains to be exposed for when the snow starts to melt.
This is one of the City of Nanaimo Public Works snow and ice control vehicles. And this is actually set up for a brining unit right now, or anti-icing. And what brine is a 23.3% sodium chloride solution. And it comes out of the spray bars down here at the bottom, and it's made here at the Public Works yard. It's a proactive method of snow and ice control, as when we know that there's a winter storm coming, we can actually lay this down on the road prior to the event.
By putting the brine down before the snow comes, it buys time. It lets us get on the roads, and then when we hit it with the plows, it doesn't stick. The snow doesn't stick, it comes off much easier. Whereas if we didn't brine, the snow has an opportunity to freeze to the road.
So another benefit of the brining or anti-icing unit is that during the frosty mornings, we can have it drive down the road, and then immediately the frost disappears as they're applying the brine.
Brine's a great tool for us. It's very cost effective. We can stretch our hard-pressed tax dollars to the maximum. We can make brine for cents on the dollar.
So the other thing that we ask is that everyone stays back from these anti-icing or any winter maintenance vehicles, as they have limited visibility and it's poor conditions out there, and they're trying to maneuver around everything. So just stay back and give them a little bit of room to operate and clear the roads.
So here we are in the Public Works yard, City of Nanaimo, and what you look around, you can see our various tools that we use for snow and ice fighting. We have tandem trucks, 4x4 trucks, we have backhoes. All our trucks are capable of having front plows on them, and the larger trucks we have belly plows on them as well, and they all have a salter sander that can be mounted on the back.
This is another tool in our winter maintenance fleet. It's a salting machine. And what happens is that the salt gets loaded into this hopper, and on this conveyor where it gets hit with these two saddle tanks, which are full of brine. Then it comes out here on the spreader. And why we add the brine is that it reduces the amount of spray from the salt, so it doesn't bounce nearly as far, saving about 20 to 30% of our salt. As well, by using the anti-icing liquid on the salt, the activation starts right as it hits the road.
The purpose of the salt is to keep the roads bare, keep the ice from forming on the road. Again, safety for everyone, including ourselves and the public. That's why we put the salt down.
Today we're talking about clearing catch basins or road drains on residential roads. The first thing to understand is where the catch basin is in proximity to your residence. When clearing a catch basin or road drain, we want to make sure that you make yourself visible and aware of oncoming traffic. When clearing snow or debris from a catch basin, we ask that you put it in an area where it will not plug the catch basin again, not placing it on an already shoveled driveway or sidewalk. Sandbags are available at 2020 Labio Road 24/7. Just remember to make sure you bring a shovel. The City of Nanaimo and Public Works appreciate your help in keeping your catch basins clear. Thank you.
Back and ready to resume. And we move to discussion of monitoring strategy. I believe, Ms. Bhopal Singh, are you going to lead off on this as well?
Through the chair, yes. It's with great pleasure that I introduce Ms. Ting Pan. And before I start, I'd like to thank Ms. Brinkman and Ms. Began because, and all the staff behind them, because the action plans has been a pretty weighty undertaking, very important undertaking, and we know that once we've done it once, it's then easier every year we come back to you. So, and with that, Ms. Pan is going to present a very interesting approach to the monitoring strategy, remind you of some of the work we did back in March 2021, and now that we have the city plan adopted, some of the work that she's been leading since that time, and how you'll be involved in finalizing this draft strategy, and also going down the road looking at a discussion with you on how certain targets we look at working with you through. So with that, over to Ms. Pan.
All right, Ms. Pan, welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. So it's my pleasure to give you an update and introduction to the development of monitoring strategy. And it is one of the important steps to follow through on our commitment that we articulated in the city plan. So why do we develop this monitoring strategy? It is really meant to provide meaningful and holistic insights and tell us if our actions in the integrated action plan are effective, and to help track the progress towards city goals that we had in the city plan. And the monitoring data is supposed to give us critical feedback to help inform timely decisions about how to allocate resources, prioritize actions, and how to engage stakeholders, including senior level governments. So before we move on, I just want to show you what we mean by indicators and targets. So here we're primarily looking at the key indicators at the community level. So the key indicators are supposed to tell us how we're doing as a community and show how well a system, either a natural system, a social or economic system, is working over a period of time. There are many, many operational indicators that we're tracking and using to monitor our operation and our performance. But here we're really focusing on kind of the bigger pictures and tell us, in terms of the community well-being, how we're doing. Targets, they define desired outcomes that are connected to our city plan, and they're supposed to show what we wish to achieve and by when. So I want to give you a bit of a context and history of the work that had occurred before this latest development. So in late 2020, Council passed a motion that stated that targets and indicators relevant to the community be identified and included in the Nanaimo Donut Framework. And from the framework, we developed these 5 city plan goals, and one is connected to the idea of the ecological ceilings, and the 4 others are connected to the social foundations, these 4 aspects. And so the indicators and targets are going to be organized around these city goals. And then in 2021, during phase 2 of the Reimagine process, city council members and key stakeholders and the staff work together as a workshop, develop these draft indicators and targets. And it's probably too hard to read, but I believe these are still online. There are 28 areas of impacts that were looked at. There are 24 draft indicators being investigated. So that's kind of the starting point for this phase of the development of indicators. So after the city plan was adopted in July 2022, we began the work to further refine and select a more manageable number of indicators. So the approach that is being used to facilitate this process is called multi-capital scorecard. The multi-capital really refer to different type of capitals, like natural capital, constructed human, or social capitals that we need in order to do projects and advance our goals. And then primarily this is a tool, a triple bottom line performance measurement methodology that is designed to help an organization move beyond incremental progress. And what we mean by incremental progress is we're only measuring the direction of progress, but not really connecting it to an end goal. And instead, help develop context-based sustainability performance indicators. And what we mean is that, it is specific to Nanaimo and is meaningful in this context. And also it is tied to a sustainability threshold or end goal that we can articulate. And that way it helps connect actions with goals in a more meaningful and integrated way. And as you can see that we just have a mock-up here on the screen that shows, so these numbers don't really mean anything, they're just mock-up. But using their methodology, it is possible to produce a percentage numeric kind of score in each area of impact, as well as, against triple bottom line or against the city goals. And that made it possible for us to potentially communicate how we're doing at a community scale in a fun, clear, and easy to understand way. So I will just go through the steps that we have. I will walk you through the process and the steps that we took to get to where we are right now. The first step is applying the selection criteria. So the two key questions we asked as a kind of filter is, is this area of impact or this issue significant and relevant to the community? And we have tools to deal with. So it's not really asking do we have full control of, because when you look at all the aspirational goals in our community, we rarely have full control of any of them. But it talks about we do have some tools that we can use to address those issues. And most of the draft indicators have passed this test. The second key question is that, is there an end goal? And it has to be based on, as much as we can, find a science or ethics-based sustainability end goal in this area of impact, relating to the core values of the framework, which is living within the ecological ceilings while meeting the social needs of all. So here is a flow chart that shows, we're starting with the draft indicators from 2021. And if you can imagine, this process as a kind of a sorting exercise. So using these criteria, we're able to say, well, is this a significant issue we have the tools to deal with? If no, it doesn't necessarily mean that it will not use that indicator. It just says, probably it's not worth investing and monitoring at this level. And if it is a yes, then we go to the second question. Can we identify a sustainability angle in this area? And if the answer is yes, then they are sorted into this pile of primary indicators. And the primary indicators, we took a further look, and some of them we are quite confident they can be developed or already developed with existing resources. And then there's, they're called phase 1 indicators. And then there are some indicators that are a bit more complex, and it will require a bit research. Maybe we need to collect data that we don't already have. So we're calling them phase 2 indicators. We still think that there is a threshold, but maybe it is harder to identify. And for those that don't actually meet that second criteria, if we can actually identify a kind of sustainability threshold or end state, then they are sorted into supportive indicators. They're also important because many of these are, we have targets already established through extensive analysis, and they're stated in the city plan. So those are going to become recommended supportive indicators. And the rest are potential supportive indicators. There are no targets currently. They're not in the city plan, potentially, and then they are currently just purely incremental. It tells us, are we doing better or worse in certain area of a perspective, but it doesn't really connect it to any end state. So these are draft in primary indicators, and I should really say these are the primary indicators, areas of impacts, what they were looking at. So we think that we have 16 right now, and about 11 of them belongs to the phase 1, and then we have 5 that we are, looking into it and still investigating. We think that we need more data and research. So these are not finalized. The conversation is still ongoing, but I want to show you where we're at. And then these are the list of supportive indicators, and then there are 3 that are clearly have targets in the city plan, so they're recommended. And then the others are potential supportive indicators that we're still trying to figure out, what is the best way and if they're a good fit for city plan monitoring. So the second step is assessing the indicator suitability. So the 2 key questions we asked here is that, is this indicator a sustainability measure of performance, not just an incremental one? And so I will show you a couple of examples, and it will probably become a bit more, it's a bit easier to understand. The second question is, if we are using a correct measure, then can we identify a threshold of the quantity of the resources or whatever type of capital that is needed to maintain, in order to ensure the well-being of the community. So one example I want to show you is about water infrastructure capacity. So originally we have water resources area of impact to look at, and we had a proposed indicator, which is water consumption by residents. So water demand by our community doesn't directly point to an end goal. We don't know of whether the water consumption level is sustainable without understanding whether we have sufficient water supply. So the question became if there's a renewable water supply that is enough to meet the demand of our community. And then through conversation with our engineering department, and we understand, we're quite confident, in terms of annual precipitation in our watershed, there's sufficient renewable water supply. So the focus then shifts to, then if the water infrastructure capacity is sufficient, because water infrastructure is a resource to capture, store, and distribute water resources to meet our community demand. So the indicator we choose should assess the sufficiency of water infrastructure. And that directly ties to a limit. Because we have existing watershed reservoir capacity. That becomes the limit. That shows how much water we can retain and distribute. So that, because it ties to that physical limit, it is considered a sustainability performance measure. And then further, we then have to identify what is that threshold. And then through conversation with our engineering department, and we're told, we always want to have at least 30% of water reservoir capacity maintained at all times. Because if we don't at the driest time, then there is not sufficient water potentially to carry us through to the next season. And that's what we need in order to function as a city. Otherwise, we have to take pretty dramatic measures that I'm sure that you can think of examples, how that might look like. So that put us at risk. So this is one example on the kind of natural capital one, or on the more related to natural resources. And the other example that I will show you is one of the social indicator around housing affordability. So originally we have a proposed draft indicator and pointing to average rent of a 2-bedroom apartment. And there are multiple issues with that indicator, one being that it's a very specific type of housing that is very narrowly defined, and also the dollar value. What is considered affordable 2 years ago may not be considered affordable 20 years down the road. So it doesn't in itself tie to any particular value that we need to achieve to say, if we get there, then it means we achieved housing affordability. So we changed that indicator to the percentage of income spent on housing costs, which is directly connected to the definition of a housing affordability. And then there is data on this. So it is a sustainability performance measure. And then the sustainability threshold that we identified is, ethically speaking, no residents in Nanaimo should have to spend more than 30% of their household income spent on housing costs, including utilities, rent, and mortgage payments, and the strata fees. I just want to clarify that when we're identifying these end goals or threshold, it doesn't automatically equate to targets. They're just simply articulating, what our long-term vision is. And so you do have the opportunity to review this and decide, based on our jurisdiction, the tools that we have, the resources that you want to allocate, that is kind of the next phase, but I'm hoping that by articulating what those end goals are and being able to define those metrics, it actually makes the target setting hopefully a little bit easier.
Ms. Pan, sorry to interrupt, but I have at least one question. Councillor Hemmons, no? Mayor Krug.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just wanted to say this is a very good example. As you pointed out, we talk about in step one selection criteria, is this a significant and relevant issue to our community that we have tools to deal with? And housing affordability clearly is a significant issue in our community as it is everywhere in the province. And this is where, for me, this gets tricky but important, is to understand what tools we do have that are available to us. I mean, if the province tomorrow increased social assistance rates, for example, or provided subsidies to seniors or all kinds of things, they might well succeed in getting us to where, by general agreement across the nation, we should be, no more than 30%. But it won't have anything to do with us. And where we might get lucky and we might not. And all I'm saying is that I think we're going to have to be very specific about the things that we can do and the expectations that we create around this. I'm not a strict supply and demand person, but you know, as everyone points out, the affordable rentals in Nanaimo, if you've managed to stay in one place for a long time, were built 30 and 40 years ago. And so what we build today will be the future affordable housing, so to speak. When I say we build, I mean simply the developments we approve. But this is where the rubber is hitting the road around the donut economy and what we're planning and hoping to do. And I think we just need to be very clear with the public about what it is we can do to impact that. I mean, that's a desirable goal for any community, but we're a municipal government, we're not the province. We don't levy income taxes, we don't have controls over these things. And I think it's important that we not raise public expectations too high, but at the same time, do what, and I give credit to staff and previous councils have done in terms of creating affordable housing across this community. Secondary suites, I think we're hitting about 65 or 70% of all new single-family dwellings have secondary suites in the city. I think there's now a general recognition that the so-called, what do they call it, middle housing or whatever, as opposed to throwing people into towers, it's building townhouses, it's creating density in communities so that it's not like you have a bunch of towers surrounded by single-family dwellings. You have towers, yes, but you have strata plans, duplexes, fourplexes, whatever as the case may be, that makes the city more livable. Anyways, here endeth my whining. It's not really a question, but I do want to say at this point in your presentation how much I appreciate this, because for me, the whole point of what we're seeing today is to show what the plan is all about, notwithstanding the criticism that we don't have public safety up there in big bright lights, notwithstanding we're spending, I forget how much of our budget on policing and hiring a dozen community safety officers and 15 more RCMP, et cetera, et cetera. It's clearly a priority. We've put our money where our mouth is for a change. This presentation enables people to understand that we're not being run from Davos in Switzerland. This is not some grand scheme launched by the conspiracy theorists. This is, in fact, a down-to-earth approach as to how we create a city that recognizes the changed world we live in, and at the same time, through the good work of staff, provides indicators as to whether or not we're going to succeed in it. And I think this is where it gets complex and challenging, but as I say, I'm also concerned about the raising of expectations about what we can and cannot do.
Ms. Bhopal Singh.
Through the chair, if I might follow up, one thing, and I think we've been trying to emphasize, particularly with the last two presentations and this one, is we're giving you draft proposed. And Ms. Begun, when she went through the implementation section, one key thing we thought was important was what's the role of the city, what's the role of others? And that might actually help you guide us as to, you know what, this is not what we want to measure, or this is what we do want to measure for those very reasons. So that section of the draft implementation plan connects nicely to Ms. Pan's work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms. Pan.
And through the chair, and just another point I guess I want to share is that I think it is very important to also have indicators and track our performance and be really clear about what is within our power to do. But setting these kind of indicators at that level, at the city plan level, that is directly connected to our city goals, one thing I think it could be very powerful to show is that if we're doing really well here and then there's still a gap, there's obviously either, we need to think about how to address that gap and what our role will be. And, there are other system actors and senior level governments that maybe, need to be stepping up. And so it will provide very solid evidence and, build a case for those areas. And so I just want to emphasize, this desired, aspirational goals don't automatically commit us to those goals. You still have to look at, what is available to us to be able to set those targets, and that is to come. So last step is metric development. And so the metric is following the same kind of convention. So we always want to compare the actual impact, which means what we're measuring, against the sustainability end goal that we quantified, so what we ultimately want to maintain or achieve. And just going back to the examples that I shared, so in terms of water infrastructure capacity, so what we're measuring, we decided that, what it makes sense is to look at the sum of the total value of our watershed reservoir capacity from the 30 driest days of the year. We want to make sure, those days are covered. And then the denominator, or the end goal, is that, all those 30 days are about 50%. So you can see that on the side that there's a lookup table. So we recognize that, it is not always that black and white. It's like, we're at a 31% is sustainable, if we're 29% is unsustainable. There is actually a band of success. So if we're at a 45%, obviously it's better than being at 35%. So we assign different values to these different increments, so that, if we fall below 30%, you get a value of a 0, because that is a problem. But if we're above 50%, we're very comfortable. And then there's the value in between, that is the area of concern. That's when our staff started to pay attention. We start to think about, what measures that needs to come in place to avoid getting below that 30%. So this is, one way to look at year over year, what will be the trend, considering all the impact from climate change, from population growth, from individual household consumption, all combined. In the end, it has to point to this, this state where we need to be under 30%. It may not be possible at some point, given, all those factors, and then that will trigger a bigger question about, what will be needed then to upgrade our infrastructure. But this will provide, sufficient insights to give you a heads up. If we're seeing, this value is really low over a period of time, then we know that, it's telling us we need to take different action. And then the housing affordability, so if we convert that into a metric, we'll be looking at the proportion of a house population with housing costs that do not exceed 30% against, the sustainability threshold that we want to ultimately achieve, is that all of the house population will not have to spend more than that. And I just want to also say that, with the multi-capital scorecard, you get a positive score if you show progress. But this is really, having that end state defined is to tell us how close or how far we are towards that, and how you can, show leadership and work with all the other system actors and level governments to achieve that. So I think that is the end of my slide, and we're going back to the next step, and I will.
Just before we proceed, there are a couple of questions or comments. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you, with the water infrastructure capacity, do you use that to help, and possibly you use it, maybe in public works, but do you use it to decide whether or not you would make more restrictions for the general public as you're watching the water decrease, the capacity in the reservoir? Do you use that as your model for going from, say, stage, 1 to stage 2 to stage 3, that kind of thing? Is this where you would use it, or is this for maybe just capacity for growth?
Thanks, Chair. I think this one is a really good, the it'll show trends over time.
Yes.
And it's a good one to report out on how do we do this year. I would say that when it comes to water, we're monitoring it actually every single day. Where are we at with the capacity of Jump Lake, as an example?
Yes.
And how quickly is it being depleted? And so we want to, and then what's the sort of monthly long-range forecast? So it's all of those things kind of come into play. If we start to get nervous, if we start to get below or close to that 50%, then we're going to go, okay, we should raise the watering restrictions. And in fact, I would say we've already put in place watering restrictions that are, every single year. It's as of May the 1st, you start. It's an automatic, and people become habituated to that.
That's right.
But if we need to escalate it, then that's really those day-to-day and then long-term monitoring as we go. But this will be this particular measure will be a good way of reporting it. It's like, oh, we had a 5-year stretch there where we were almost at 30% every time, and that's getting nerve-wracking, kind of. Yeah.
Yes, thank you so much.
And Councillor Hemmons.
Thank you, Chair. That was an interesting point about being able to observe every day, but for housing affordability, we don't. So in terms of switching to that example, the 30% of household income on housing, is that a stat we collect? And if not, how are we going to collect that stat to inform our monitoring?
So the data, through the chair, the data is available on an annual basis through CMHC.
Okay. Wonderful, thank you.
Good. Anything else? Ms. Tan, Ms. Bhopal Singh?
Through the chair, unless there's other questions through you, it's just a reminder of the proposed next steps, confirming with you that this looks like a reasonable approach. I believe when Mr. Rudolph was speaking with you, I was perhaps hearing that you might want to change the order in which some of these actions under the goals are presented. And I guess that would be maybe, I don't know if we need something like a motion, Mr. Rudolph, but just some feedback from you on the next steps.
Just to align, if I may, again, I had mentioned, I think earlier on the Downtown Safety Action Plan, for example, there's going to be other topics coming along as GPCs anyway. So I had asked for the planning department to bring forward a status report on the implementation of the Downtown Safety Action Plan in March of this year. So it might make sense, given that, to move the Healthy Nanaimo piece ahead to align with that. That would be one suggestion. I mean, it's only 1 month, but it is moving it ahead. And because, yeah, so just one suggestion. But again, it's really up to council. Which of these topics would you like to unpack first? That'd be the way I'd put it back to you. And then, not to say the others aren't important, but what's the first one you want to tackle?
No, they're all important. I think we recognize that. My personal preference would be to agree with what you've just suggested. I don't know if we need a motion, but I do have a couple of speakers. Councillor Eastmuir, you're first.
Thank you, through you, Chair. Yes, I think, personally, I think doing C3 and C4 first on that table, the Healthy Nanaimo and Empowered Nanaimo would potentially make sense to do those first and then do the Green Nanaimo and Connected Nanaimo, recognizing it's not that much of a time difference, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perino.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I certainly agree with you, Mr. Rudolph. I think C3 needs to be first. And then for me, the section on the a prosperous Nanaimo action, so C4, 5, D, and E, and then go on back up to C1 and C2. I think the work that's been done over the past council on the Green Nanaimo initiatives, certainly so much more needs to be done, but I think you've done excellent work. So I think it could be put down just a couple of months, just to give the other areas quicker pace. That would be my suggestion. If you need a motion, I'm certainly willing to move it.
I look to Ms. Gurry.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think a motion is required. I think that that we've heard some consensus anyways that March 13th would probably deal with the Healthy Nanaimo actions, to align with what's already coming to you as well. As well, on February 13th at the GPC, we can bring back what we've heard today and make sure that that schedule is kind of aligning with your wishes and get motions at that point, should you wish to change it and or nail it down. And just one other note, I'm not sure if they'll all be ready at the same time to be so maneuverable, but staff may need more time to work on one or two, so we'll have more of an idea on that and report back to you on February 13th if we can move all of those up and arrange them the way council has just indicated right now.
All right, thank you. So I'm hearing that no formal motion is required. I'll just indicate that I agree with the thoughts of Councillor Perino and Mayor Krog.
Thank you very much, Chair. Speaking that old cliche, too many cooks spoil the broth. And I suspect this didn't happen by accident, if staff have proposed that those be the proposed next steps, it may account for their availability, where they are in terms of things. And if Ms. Vopel Singh's shaking her head and saying no, I was going to say let's go with what we've got, because at the end of the day, we're just looking for the broth. And if the broth is available on May the 29th, I'm indifferent as to what steps we use to get there. So I'm with staff on this one. This is a major project. This represents the culmination of a lot of work. They've done a lot of work, and whatever suits them suits me, for what it's worth. Thank you.
No, good comment. Thank you.
Through the chair, I think we can pivot, and that was the whole idea. And what we're bringing to is draft as well. So it's not like this is perfect. And so even if we expect and anticipate there will be things missing, things that you may wish to add. So we will be prepared to switch that around. We just followed the structure of the order of the city plan goals for convenience for you. So that was it. Before we wrap up, Ms. Ting has a slight correction to make on the housing indicator. Thank you.
So I misspoke earlier, through the chair, that the CMHC's data was actually through census, so that's every 4 years, and then there are actually quite a few indicators we're looking at that have really good data, but then they're tied to census data. But the monitoring is really meant to be updated and reported out every year. So we will have some indicators that will probably stay the same for 4 years and then get updated. I just want to clarify that. My apologies.
No, thank you, Ms. Pan, and I want to thank you for being part of this information meeting today, because too often we I think get wrapped up in our goals and our plans, but we forget about the monitoring aspect of it, and that whether it's city policy or practices or projects or whatever, has to be an important component in terms of being accountable to the taxpayer and to each other. And I'm reminded of the words of a professor I once had on the subject of evaluation and assessment, and his famous or continual quote was, "If it's not monitored, it's optional." And I think those are words to remember. So thank you for your contribution today.
Thank you.
Ms. Bhopal Singh, anything else?
Through the chair, I think on behalf of our team here, we'd like to thank council, and we look forward to further conversations with you and aligning things so we can present you with the information you need to make the priority decisions. And I just want to iterate that my team here have worked very closely with many staff across all the departments that you don't see today who participated in what we've been able to present today. So you have a fraction of the team with some of these leads here, and then you've seen all the GMs, but their staff have all supported. One last thing I'd like to mention is I actually looked at the word siloed to see if the word unsiloed was the opposite, to explain that city plan is the opposite of silos, and unsiloed didn't quite work, but the word was holistic, and we really are pushing the envelope, and others are really watching. And what Ms. Pan's doing here is taking, again, traditional monitoring to a different level. And what she didn't explain is the multi-capital scorecard is typically applied to businesses or corporations. So it might be the City of Nanaimo as a corporation, but not the community. And this is an attempt to take that in a community-based context. And so it's actually, again, pushing the envelope. And we believe we may be the first municipality in Canada to take this method and apply it at the community level. Bit of an experiment, but again, we're testing things out through this process. So I just thought I'd say that. And maybe over to Mr. Rudolph to close us off. Thank you.
I'm pleased that we get through this by 4 o'clock. I think there's only so much you can absorb. There's an awful lot of information, and I think the seeds have been planted about where we're at and the work plan that is ensuing with you. So there'll be lots of conversation and actions resulting from that. And there's stuff in play already. So, yeah, the next couple of months are going to be very busy.
Thank you, Mr. Rudolph, and to all staff for your work in preparing this presentations today. Very useful information. Appreciate it very much. So we have an item left on our agenda, which is question period, unless I hear differently from Ms. Gurry. And we do have a question, Ms. Provo, if you would like to come down. This question related to agenda item on city plan safety.
Hello. My first question is, can you provide how Protection Island will be specifically integrated into the city plan? And can you provide any information what Protection Island will look like in 20 years?
Well, I would suggest before I go to Ms. Bhopal Singh that this relates to our earlier discussion on neighborhood communities and support for them. But before I go further, I'll look to staff.
Okay, so I may ask for some help from my team, but I'll start. So first of all, through the chair to our delegate, with Protection Island, you'll notice that there's some land use policies that set the framework around the future of that area. And then within that, we have some direction around working with Protection Island as it's one of our recognized community associations. I'm looking to Ms. Brinkman to confirm that. I'm pretty sure it is. And so as part of that, we continue to engage with them. And as Ms. Brinkman said, in April, we'll be coordinating a session for council to work directly with the neighborhood associations and discuss some of their priorities. And in line with the city plan, what that may look like, and it's council's discretion, is what different actions or strategies to support the desires of the Protection Island community. So some of those will be more detailed than what you see here. So for example, one neighborhood might say, you know, our top priority for the next 10 years is a new crosswalk, or it's sidewalks, or it's park. And then council will have this array of priorities, and it's up to them, working with you, as to what they direct us to do. I hope that's a good answer. But me and my staff, and Ms. Brinkman, who has the neighborhood portfolio, would be very happy to speak to you outside the meeting too.
Can I ask more questions?
Yes, before you do though, I will just comment that Protection Island, in my opinion, is an example of a very highly organized and well-run neighborhood association, so you can be pleased about that. Yes, I'll allow a second question.
Can you discuss if fencing is under the safety and security plan, and are we able to utilize this space for farming and teaching?
Can you be more specific? Fencing?
Fencing downtown, lots of fencing, green spaces that are not being used by the public. Are we able to use this for farming, teaching?
I would have to be able to look at a specific piece of ground to answer with any knowledge, Ms. Provo, unless...
Take a crack at it.
Councillor Hemmons, go ahead, help me out.
If I may, I would say that the intent behind the safety plan is to take the fences down eventually. In terms of what can be done with the areas that are fenced right now, I would suggest in front of the firehouse grill or the fire hall and by the fountain, probably not great spaces for farming or teaching, but the city certainly does have spaces for that I'd be happy to tell you about after the meeting.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your participation today. So there are no further questions on my question period sheet. So Ms. Gurry, I believe that brings us to a motion for adjournment, which Mayor Krogh is making. Councillor Hemmons is seconding. All in favor? Any opposed? Carried. Thank you very much, everybody. A good day.